Chapter 671. Eric opened his eyes in a daze and realized that he had fallen asleep on the conference table. He propped himself up and saw that there were all kinds of documents, drawings, coffee cups, and a few laptops scattered on the wide conference table. Noticing that Eric had lifted his head, Tina Brown, who was tapping on the keyboard on the other side, smiled and greeted Eric good morning. Eric nodded in response and his mind gradually cleared up. Soon, he recalled what happened last night. Due to the sudden situation at the Victoria's Secret show last night, Eric added a Cinderella incident to the post-marketing plan of the Victoria's Secret show. After everyone finished the meeting, they began to contact various media to change the press release for the next day. Unknowingly, it was already the latter half of the night. Eric faintly remembered that it was already 4 o'clock in the morning when he could not take it anymore and fell asleep in advance. Looking at Tina Brown, who was busy quietly beside him, and the LTD employees who were still working in the work area outside the glass door, Eric asked Tina Brown, "Don't tell me that you guys didn't rest for the entire night?" Tina Brown merely smiled softly and turned the laptop screen in front of her to Eric. She said, "Eric, this is the topic that was rushed out from Boston overnight. Take a look and see if there's anything that needs to be changed." Eric saw the eye-catching silver high heel picture on the screen. Although he wanted to take a hot shower and eat something right now, he was too embarrassed to reject Tina Brown's request. Just when he was about to pull the laptop over to take a look, a slight rumbling sound resonated in the conference room. Tina Brown raised her brow in confusion at first but realized something later on. She smiled and said, "I'm sorry, Eric. I forgot that you haven't eaten breakfast yet. Why don't you take a look at it later?" Eric did not reject her. Indeed, he did not have much energy to work with the combination of exhaustion and hunger. He began to miss Kelly all of a sudden. If it was any other time, the gentle and considerate female assistant would have definitely prepared breakfast for him. However, Kelly had returned to Los Angeles due to some urgent matters the day before yesterday. Standing up and stretching his body, Eric said to Tina Brown, "Have all of you had breakfast?" Tina Brown nodded and pointed at the steaming hot coffee next to her. "We ate an hour ago." "Oh yeah, there's a girl waiting for you outside the door." Eric walked out of the conference room. One of the twins, who was sitting on the sofa in the outer lounge area, quietly reading a magazine, noticed his appearance and stood up. Eric was already used to the twins always appearing together, so when he suddenly saw one alone, he suddenly felt a little unaccustomed. Realizing something, he asked tentatively, "Did the girl get into some kind of trouble, so you have to be cannon fodder?" One of the twins shook her head seriously. "No, master, the boss came last night. When he saw you working, he asked me to stay and take care of you." Eric thought that the little girl was quite considerate. He smiled and asked, "Are you the elder sister or the younger sister? And where did Drew go?" "I'm the older sister. My younger sister went to East Hampton with the boss." Eric nodded and understood that the one in front of him was Natasha. Perhaps it was because the twins were separated, Eric subconsciously thought of Natasha's younger sister's name, but in the end, he still could not remember. Many Westerners always had the belief that a long name would make them look cool. However, in reality, if the name was too long, it would only make people unable to remember it. It was not cool at all. "Forget it, I'll just treat them both as Natasha. They look exactly the same anyway." Eric and Natasha spoke very casually, but the LTD employees who were busy or pretending to be busy around them were all shocked when they heard a certain sentence from the twins. "Master, master, master." This form of address is really retro. Natasha, who had a cold temperament, had been sitting quietly on the sofa in the resting area for several hours. All the employees who were working overtime were silently guessing her identity. Some male employees even boldly went up to her and said a few words. Although Natasha responded politely, she clearly had an unapproachable temperament. Everyone could feel that this temperament was not arrogant, but it was still unapproachable. Everyone could feel that this temperament was not arrogant, but it was still unapproachable. Because the Russian girl's skin was as white as snow, and she exuded an unusual quietness that stood aloof from worldly affairs, it only took a few hours for the men in the work area to silently give Natasha the nickname Little Snowman. The moment they heard Natasha's name for Eric, The sound of heartbreak almost rang out in the work area. Eric felt the sudden silence in the work area and looked around in confusion. Everyone immediately moved under Eric's gaze, as if nothing had happened just now. Eric did not realize that anything was wrong for a moment. He took a big bag from the twins and opened it. In addition to toothbrushes and other customary utensils, there was also a bath towel. With a smile, Eric said to Natasha, "I'm going to find a place to take a bath. Help me prepare breakfast, anything will do." Natasha nodded and followed Eric out of the work area. When the two figures disappeared, a strange cry of regret and unwillingness suddenly sounded in the work area. "God, punish these evil capitalists." Coincidentally, the door of another office suddenly opened at this time. Emily, who was talking on her phone and walking out, suddenly raised her eyebrows and apologized. She reached out and covered the phone with her hand. Her sharp eyes looked around in the work area and locked onto a certain unlucky guy. She angrily said, "Jason, it was you who was screaming just now, wasn't it?" Amidst the snickers, the young man named Jason stood up with a sullen face and said, "Sorry, Miss Brighton, I lost my composure." Emily was still very angry and even a little wronged. She raised her voice and said, "In the year since the acquisition of LTD, I haven't fired a single person. Not only that, all of your salaries have increased by 10%. Is there anything I've done wrong to you? It's just overtime. Didn't I also work overtime here? Why should God punish me?" Jason explained with a bitter face, "Miss Brighton, I wasn't talking about you just now." "Oh." Emily looked around. "Is there a second capitalist here? Do you think I'm an idiot?" There really was a second capitalist here, and it was a super capitalist. But Jason had already offended a little wild cat. He didn't dare to offend another Tyrannosaurus Rex. "Sorry, Miss Brighton, I'm very sorry." Emily was about to say something, but the phone seemed to have been hung up. Then it immediately rang again. "I don't owe you anything. If you think LTD's treatment is not good enough, then hand me your resignation letter." Emily glared at the unlucky guy and said this. She picked up the phone and hurried through the work area to the conference room. After Emily's figure disappeared, the work area was silent for a few seconds. After confirming that no big shots would appear again, there was a burst of gloating laughter. Eric returned to LTD's conference room after breakfast. The media information about yesterday's Victoria's Secret show had basically been summarized. Most of the mainstream newspapers had made a detailed report on the Victoria's Secret show. Many of the headlines were occupied by the Victoria's Secret angels in gorgeous angel costumes. In order to attract as much attention as possible, the newspaper editors racked their brains to find their own focus. Some paid attention to models, some discussed fashion, and some focused on music. Of course, there were also various comments in the media. The Washington Post praised the Victoria's Secret show as a gorgeous visual feast. The Chicago Sun's commentator disdainfully criticized the Victoria's Secret show as a jaw-dropping shameless farce. With the control of the powerful media resources in their hands, most of the negative comments barely caused any waves. Through the special feature of Yahoo, the largest media website on the internet, the report of ABC Television Network's morning news, the close cooperation of the Hearst Group, the News Corporation, the Washington Post, and other print media forces that were closely related to the Firefly Group, and with the full force of online media, television media, and print media. Although the image of the Victoria's Secret show in the public's mind could not be considered perfect, it was definitely highly anticipated. Diane Kruger's shoe accident on the runway was quickly rendered into an industry story similar to Cinderella's fairy tale under clever marketing methods. Many ordinary people who did not pay attention to the Victoria's Secret show even began to look forward to Diane Kruger's shoe accident in the Victoria's Secret show. At the same time, the discount generated by the grand marketing that lasted for several months was also amazing. At the beginning of the year, when Chris took the absolute control of LTD with a sky-high valuation of $2.4 billion, most analysts in the industry were pessimistic about the deal and predicted that LTD's stock price would definitely fall again after the deal. However, these people only calculated the beginning and did not guess the ending. After the restructuring of LTD Group, the stock price did experience a fall in the initial period. However, After Eric announced the Victoria's Secret annual show, the sales of Victoria's Secret underwear rose at an amazing speed after 6 months of continuous marketing. Victoria's Secret was the most important brand under Ltd. Even after the merger of Ltd and Brighton Fashion, the Victoria's Secret brand still accounted for more than half of the new group. With the continued rise of Victoria's Secret underwear sales and brand awareness, Ltd's stock market value began to rise slowly for 6 months after the initial fall of $1 billion. On the second day of the Victoria's Secret show, Ltd's stock price rose by 7.5% again, and the stock market value was close to $3.7 billion. It was expected that after the Victoria's Secret show in December, Ltd's total market value would exceed $4 billion. Most importantly, this breakthrough was not a capital bubble because Ltd's stock price at this time was supported by a very solid brand value and product sales. After the initial acquisition, Firefly Investment and the Brighton family held 62% of Ltd's shares. When Ltd's market value exceeded $4 billion, compared to the initial total assets and cash expenditure of about $1 billion, the assets in the hands of Firefly Investment and the Brighton family had increased by $1.5 billion in just 1 year. This was equivalent to the net profit of the entire Firefly Group this year. When Fortune magazine revealed this series of data, the media, who were originally enthusiastically calculating how much loss Eric would suffer if he gave up on making a movie and turned to making an underwear show that had no commercial value at all, shut their mouths. After all, even if he made a movie that was comparable to the box office of Jurassic Park, it was absolutely impossible to bring in $1.5 billion in profits within a year. After the Victoria's Secret show, the most stressful period for Eric was finally over. When the follow-up media publicity was on track, Eric left all the trivial work of Ltd to Emily and focused on editing the Victoria's Secret show on TV. At the same time, after November, the end-of-year holiday of 1994 was approaching. Some second- and third-tier film companies began to release their films in the second week of November. Firefly only released 2 films directly at the end of the year: Julia's return to the romantic film genre, Runaway Bride, and Nicolas Cage's Face/Off. In addition to these 2 films, Little Girl's Flower Pictures opened with Kevin Costner's version of Mission Impossible. Brian De Palma's skillful suspense technique matched with Kevin Costner's unique and restrained masculine temperament. Although the brand new Mission Impossible did not have Tom Cruise, it had its own unique charm. After Law Enforcement failed miserably during the summer, the results of Mission Impossible could be said to be related to whether he could continue to maintain his status as a celebrity. Therefore, Kevin Costner was also very attentive to the promotion of Mission Impossible. A month before the movie was released, he began to frequently travel around to promote it. The test screening of Mission Impossible also received a good reputation. Moreover, another thing that Eric was happy to see was that in the wind of the salary reduction that he instigated, Warner Brothers was forced by various pressures to quickly take over Kevin Costner's long-prepared future Waterworld. Just like in the original universe, they chose Hawaii as the filming location. In Eric's memory, it was because the frequent waves in Hawaii washed away the filming set built by the crew time and time again, causing the budget to finally be pushed to a jaw-dropping sky-high price. MGM originally planned to release Resident Evil at the end of the year. Although this R-rated zombie film was not in line with the style of the low holiday schedule, it often achieved unexpected results by going against the trend. What's more, the production budget of Resident Evil was only more than $30 million, plus the post-production marketing budget. The cost would not exceed $50 million. Through box office and video operations and other channels, there was not much pressure to recoup the cost and make a profit. As long as the first film made a name for itself and continued to produce sequels like the original, it could create a stable and profitable project for DreamWorks Productions. However, there were some problems with the post-production of this zombie film, and the release had to be delayed until the Easter period. Sony's executive vice president, Nobuyuki Ide, began to personally intervene in the film business of Sony in the second half of the year. By the end of the year, although Peter Guber still maintained his position as Columbia's CEO, he was basically a figurehead. Sony had begun to look for the next Columbia CEO with great fanfare. Michael Lynn, who had just resigned from Firefly Pictures in September, even received an invitation. However, Michael Lynn did not intend to get involved in the mess that was Sony Columbia. He only informed Eric of the news through a phone call. Although Peter Guber was destined to be kicked out, Sony did not slack off on the release of Columbia and Firefly's Game of the Brave. As the only CG-based special effects film at the end of the year, Sony obviously had high hopes for Game of the Brave. While the whole of Hollywood was busy dealing with the upcoming hot schedule, Eric only flew back to Los Angeles to attend a Firefly's year-end executive meeting. After that, he hurried back to New York and continued to work in the editing room of ABC's program production department. Other than promising to support the premiere of Julia and his wife's 2 films, Eric did not intend to get involved in the film's marketing. A boss who knew how to let go was a good boss. This was what Eric had learned from Warren Buffett recently. Warren Buffett had a very tacit relationship with many of Hathaway's companies. In an interview, when a manager of a subsidiary of Hathaway was asked why the subsidiary was doing so well, the manager's answer was very thought-provoking. The manager said that it was because Warren Buffett had forgotten that he had acquired the company, and he had also forgotten that the company had been acquired by Warren Buffett. As the scale of the assets under his name grew larger and larger, if he could not find a reasonable balance between delegating and seizing power, Eric would definitely be overwhelmed by the heavy workload. Many times, Eric even faintly felt this kind of pressure. Chapter 672. At ABC's Program Production Center, Emily walked into a studio with her assistant, who was holding a thick stack of documents. She looked at the busy crowd recording for the Victoria's Secret show and waited patiently for a while. Eric, who had been notified, walked out of the crowd. Noticing the serious expression on Emily's face, Eric took her to a temporary office and asked his secretary to make coffee. He then asked, "Is there a result from that incident?" Emily nodded, then shook her head. She spread out the documents in her assistant's hands and handed them to Eric. "The FBI in Manhattan checked all the video information we provided, but they didn't find anything. There were too many people going in and out of the backstage in the last 2 days. In addition, there was no problem with the fingerprints. Obviously, the person who did this is very smart." The two were talking about the shoe incident on the night of the Victoria's Secret show. Although the media had rendered the time when Diane Kruger's high heels fell into a story similar to Cinderella's, the story behind the incident didn't seem so beautiful. According to the FBI's examination of the broken shoelace, the broken shoelace was indeed broken by someone. Eric read the report in his hand and asked, "Did they find out how the shoelace was tampered with?" Emily took out her handbag and took out a delicate nail file and a thin rope. In front of Eric, she gently scratched the rope with the file for a while and handed it over. "Here, it's like this. Someone used a nail file, so the broken part looks like it broke naturally. But according to the FBI's report, the direction of the broken shoelace is horizontal. If it broke naturally, the force of the broken shoelace should be vertical." Eric picked up the rope that Emily handed over, which was only connected by a little thread. With a slight tug, it broke into 2 pieces. He shook his head helplessly. "This is really..." Noticing Eric's eyes drifting to the nail file, Emily said, "There's no way to investigate this at all. Every angel in the makeup area had a set of tools, and..." Emily paused and said, "Inspector Linney from the FBI told me that unless we file a case with great fanfare, we won't be able to find any results at all. However, he also said that he's done everything he can for us. If we file a case with great fanfare, the media won't be able to hide it. They'll bear a lot of risks, and will definitely be criticized." Although the Victoria's Secret show had been over for a few days, the media's attention to it didn't seem to be waning. Before that, some tabloid newspapers had speculated about the fall of Diane Kruger's high-heeled shoes on the runway. Now, this matter had been rendered into a beautiful accident. If they investigated it with great fanfare, the fairy tale that had just been created would instantly collapse. If the FBI filed a case for investigation because of a shoelace, they would definitely be labeled as making a mountain out of a molehill by the media. This incident required the on-site staff to be questioned, and there was no way to invite a private detective to investigate. "If that's the case, then forget it," Eric said as he shook his head and reluctantly held the nail file. Hearing that Eric had given up on the investigation, Emily breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't that she wanted to protect the murderer, but with the current situation, no matter from which point of view, suspending the investigation was a matter of more advantages than disadvantages. After this matter was resolved, Emily immediately talked about something else. "Eric, where do you plan to spend Thanksgiving?" "Malibu," Eric said as he recalled the situation last year. There was a look of anticipation on his face. He could gather the women together and sleep with them. This was a once-a-year opportunity, so he definitely couldn't miss it. "I'll be in Malibu for Thanksgiving and in New York for Christmas." "Why?" Emily's shrewd and capable aura disappeared. She hesitated for a moment like a little girl and said, "Can you change your itinerary?" "For Thanksgiving. Accompany Chris and me to Maryland." "Oh, it's best to bring Shashya and the rest." Eric thought about it and understood what was going on. Jeffrey was currently living in seclusion on a farm in Maryland and rarely went to New York and Los Angeles. As filial sons and future daughters-in-law, Chris and Emily would definitely go back to Maryland to accompany their old man on Thanksgiving. However, as two young bachelors who were old in age, they would definitely be forced to get married every festive season. Eric laughed gloatingly and shook his head. "No, I'm not going. Besides, this is for your own good. If I bring my family to Maryland to spend Thanksgiving with you, Jeffrey will definitely want grandchildren even more when he sees Kevin and Shashya. Won't you guys be under even more pressure?" Emily glared at Eric. "Forget it if you don't want to go. I've never seen anyone gloat as much as you." Eric still had a smile on his face. "Isn't Chris still in Europe?" "If you're really afraid of this, you can discuss it with Chris and ask him to find an excuse to come back after Thanksgiving." Emily said, "Jeffrey personally called Europe. Chris has already agreed. Besides, even if Chris won't do what you said." Eric leaned back in his leather chair and spread his hands. "Then I can't do anything about it. In my opinion, why don't you guys just get married? Even if you don't plan to get married, you can have a child first." "I just turned 30. "Stop, you're too pretentious. If I didn't know better, I would think that you're only 13 years old. You're making those girls who became mothers in their teens feel bad." Emily glared at Eric and curled her lips. She stood up and said, "I really don't have anything to say to you guys who are full of male chauvinism. I'm leaving." Eric sent Emily off and returned to the studio. Everyone had just finished filming some scenes and was resting. Eric checked the effects of the shoot and walked over to the 5 Victoria's Secret spokespersons who were resting. Today, they were going to record some highlights between each theme of the Victoria's Secret show. Although it involved other Victoria's Secret angels, most of the highlights were still focused on the 5 spokespersons. Noticing Eric walking into the lounge, the 5 angel supermodels sitting around the sofa drinking coffee greeted Eric together. Eric smiled and nodded. He watched Diane Kruger get up and pour him a cup of coffee. He thanked her and sat down on a single sofa nearby. He casually took out a manicure knife from his pocket and played with it a few times. He chatted casually with the others and started to manicure his nails casually. The 5 Victoria's Secret angels noticed Eric's actions and had different expressions on their faces. Christy Durrington and Linda Evangelista had a faint smile on their faces. Cindy Crawford's expression was a little puzzled at first. Then, a hint of understanding flashed across her face, but it was quickly covered up by a smile. Tyra Banks and Diane Kruger picked up their coffee cups and covered their expressions, trying to make their eyes look normal. Eric took in the expressions of the 5 women. His gaze paused on Cindy Crawford's face for a moment before he quickly looked away. He asked the women, "Is there a problem?" "Eric, that's not how you use a manicure knife," Linda Evangelista smiled and put down her coffee cup. She stretched out her slender fingers and gestured a few times. She said, "Your nails will look ugly if you do it like that." Eric finally understood why the 5 women had such expressions. He shrugged indifferently. Just as he was about to say that he didn't care if his nails looked good, he pointed at Cindy Crawford and said, "Cindy, help me demonstrate how to use it." Cindy Crawford looked at Tyra Banks and Diane Kruger sitting on her right. The two of them were closer to Eric than she was. Why did this guy ask her to demonstrate? Thinking back to just now, Cindy Crawford's heart suddenly jumped. She suddenly realized that her reaction just now must have caused this guy to misunderstand something. How despicable. How could he think that she was the one who did it? Even if Diane Kruger became popular in the modeling circle, she wouldn't be much of a threat to her. She wouldn't gain much by doing this. Cindy Crawford looked at Tyra Banks next to her. Although Tyra Banks debuted a few years earlier than Diane Kruger, her fame was not much higher than Diane Kruger's. Among the 5 spokespersons, the 2 of them were in a competitive relationship. If Diane Kruger screwed up, Tyra Banks would obviously benefit more among the 5. However, Cindy Crawford didn't dare to say anything on the spot. She just obediently got up and walked over at Eric's request. When she took the manicure knife from Eric's hand and was about to return it, she saw Eric stretch out his big hand to her. Okay, hateful man. Cindy Crawford was angry, but her face had already put on a very skillful expression of resentment. She gently squatted down to help Eric demonstrate how to use the manicure knife. Noticing this scene, Christy Darrington immediately stood up as if she had just remembered something. She said, "I think I need to touch up my makeup. I seem to have put on a lot of lip gloss. I need to reapply it." Linda Evangelista found an excuse almost at the same time. The 2 women couldn't wait to get up and walk out. Tyra Banks looked at the actions of the 2 seniors, and although she did not find any reason, she also stood up and walked out. Diane Kruger, who also stood up, had a little resentment on her face. Shouldn't this kind of thing be done by me? Why did he call for Cindy Crawford? Soon, only Eric and Cindy Crawford were left in the lounge. Seeing the door gently closed, Cindy Crawford didn't stop what she was doing. She looked at Eric with a wronged expression and said, "I didn't do it." "I know." Cindy Crawford waved the manicure knife in her hand. "Then why did you?" Eric took the manicure knife and threw it into the trash can next to him. He said, "I knew someone was messing with me, but I couldn't investigate. I'm very angry now." "Cindy, what do you do when you're angry?" "Shopping." "Oh, what a typical woman." "You're discriminating." Cindy Crawford's eyes flashed and asked, "What about you?" Eric reached out and pressed Cindy Crawford's shoulder. "Guess." Cindy Crawford lay on Eric's lap, looking very obedient. She felt Eric's fingertips brushing across her face as if he was stroking something. The woman said with some resistance, "You can't do this." Eric didn't force her at all. He withdrew his hand and said, "Go out and let Diane in." Cindy Crawford's body stiffened, but she didn't get up. She whispered, "Despicable man." Eric had a triumphant smile on his face. He gently patted Cindy Crawford's face and said, "Hurry up, I'll give you 15 minutes." During the editing of the Victoria's Secret show, the ratings of ABC's Survivor continued to soar. In November, the average number of viewers per episode had exceeded 33 million. As long as there were no accidents, the Victoria's Secret annual show would have a very high viewership rating on the final episode of Survivor on December 6th. At the same time, the Thanksgiving period officially kicked off on November 11th. Many new films started shooting at the same time on this day. Although the number of tickets sold during the new year was much lower than during the summer, the intensity of the competition was much higher than during the summer. Julia once again ventured into romance films after 5 years. With the excellent reputation of the film and the remaining box office appeal of Pretty Woman, Runaway Bride received $28 million in the first week. Although this result wasn't amazing, the total box office exceeded $100 million. Compared to the production cost of $30 million, the return on investment of Runaway Bride could be said to be higher than many big-budget films. After Runaway Bride, Kevin Costner's version of Mission Impossible was released on November 18th. Eric promised to support Xiao and I, so he returned to Los Angeles on November 17th and appeared on time outside the Los Angeles Music Hall where the premiere was held. Compared to Runaway Bride, which could only be considered a medium-low budget film, the premiere of Mission Impossible was much grander. Walking out of the limousine, Eric walked across the long red carpet and casually accepted a few interviews before he was led backstage by the staff. Eric hugged the girl who floated over and greeted Amy Pascal and the others. He then chatted with the creators of Mission Impossible, Brian De Palma, Kevin Costner, and the others. Kevin Costner naturally didn't need to be introduced. Brian De Palma had been focusing on horror and thrillers that were difficult to import, so his reputation in the East was not so conspicuous. However, he had many classic films in his hands such as Carrie, Scarface, and so on. Moreover, there was another thing that interested Eric very much about this thriller director in his 50s. In his memory, a family of 3 originally from a noble family in the Soviet Union fled to the United States because of the political turmoil. The husband and wife soon divorced. The wife, who was once an actress, wanted to continue her career. Because of the language barrier, she ended up working as a maid in the home of Brian De Palma, a well-known Hollywood director. This maid named Galina Jovovich had a daughter named Mila Jovovich. Moreover, this story would continue and involve a large group of filmmakers. Every time Eric thought about this, he would feel that Hollywood was really small. Chapter 673. Eric was chatting with everyone when a few people appeared at the backstage entrance and walked directly towards him. The leader was a Japanese man in his 50s. He was Nobuyuki Ide, who was about to take over Norio Oga's position as Sony's CEO. Columbia's CEO, Peter Guber, President Chong Peters, and other company executives followed him. However, Eric found that the person following Nobuyuki Ide was not either Peter Guber or Chong Peters, but another middle-aged white man with an unfamiliar face. Eric knew that Sony had begun to intervene in Columbia's affairs a few months ago, but he did not expect Nobuyuki Ide to suddenly appear here. Before he had time to think about the reason, Nobuyuki Ide had already come to his side. He reached out his hand with a smile and said in fluent English, "Mr. Williams, nice to meet you. I am Nobuyuki Ide." The English pronunciation of Japanese names was very strange. Eric could not distinguish the difference between the names of the other party. He had to shake hands with the other party and said in full, "Hello, Mr. Nobuyuki Ide. Welcome to the premiere of Mission Impossible. This should be my honor. The movie that Mr. Williams personally chose must be very exciting," Nobuyuki Ide complimented. Without waiting for Eric to thank him, he gestured to the middle-aged white man next to him to say to Eric, "This is Mr. Howard Stringer. He has accepted Sony's invitation to be the CEO of Sony's American branch. He will be in charge of all Sony's industries in the United States." Eric heard Nobuyuki Ide say the other party's name and confirmed who the middle-aged white man with glasses was. He was the first non-Japanese CEO of Sony after Nobuyuki Ide stepped down. "Hello, Mr. Stringer." After Nobuyuki Ide introduced Howard Stringer, he did not have any intention of introducing Peter Guber and Chong Peters, but he expressed interest in the others present. Eric had to introduce them one by one. When it was Amy Pascal's turn, Nobuyuki Ide did not hide the regret in his tone. "Miss Pascal, losing you is really Columbia's biggest loss. I hope you can seriously consider returning to Columbia." Amy Pascal was a little surprised by Nobuyuki Ide's straightforward invitation, but she only responded politely. After a brief conversation, it was time for the premiere. The staff began to guide the guests backstage to the screening room. Eric purposely lagged behind. When most of the guests had left, the female assistant beside him took the initiative to explain to Eric, "Nobuyuki Ide arrived in Los Angeles a week ago. We received news that Nobuyuki Ide personally brought an audit team to investigate Columbia's financial information. In addition, Nobuyuki Ide's other purpose in coming to Los Angeles should be to find the next leader of Columbia." Eric nodded and remembered the bespectacled middle-aged man that Nobuyuki Ide had specially introduced to him. He asked, "Do you know anything about Howard Stringer?" Kelly said, "Howard Stringer has been the president of CBS for the past few years. He just left a few months ago. He started out as a very good reporter. When he was the head of the CBS News Department, the CBS Evening News had the highest ratings among the 3 major television networks at that time. In recent years, perhaps because of the internal instability of CBS, he did not make any outstanding achievements as the president of CBS." Eric thought for a while and asked, "How is he compared to Robert Agar?" Kelly shook her head. "I only have some basic information about him. If you need a detailed evaluation, I will get someone to do it tomorrow." Eric was not very interested in Howard Stringer, but he did not refuse the female assistant to collect more detailed information. He said, "Also, collect information about Nobuyuki Ide." Compared to the CEO after the decline of Sony, Eric was more interested in Nobuyuki Ide, the leader who brought Sony from its peak to its decline. Since Nobuyuki Ide suddenly appeared, he and Eric's seats were naturally arranged together. Eric had watched the new version of Mission Impossible several times, but he did not pay much attention to the screen. Nobuyuki Ide's mind was obviously not on the movie. During the 120 minutes of watching the movie, the two tried to sound each other out a few times. Eric almost understood the purpose of Nobuyuki Ide's visit, and Nobuyuki Ide obviously understood Eric's attitude. After the premiere, Nobuyuki Ide took the initiative to invite Eric when he was leaving. "Eric, I will be staying in Los Angeles for a while. Do you have the honor to talk to me?" Eric knew that since Nobuyuki Ide appeared in Los Angeles, the two sides must inevitably have a formal meeting. "Of course, no problem. Ide, get someone to contact my assistant to confirm the time." Nobuyuki Ide smiled and agreed. After saying goodbye to Eric, he got into the car. After driving for some distance, Nobuyuki Ide's face was gloomy. In the past few days, in the process of reviewing the detailed information of Columbia, Nobuyuki Ide found that the problem of Columbia was much more serious than the headquarters thought. In the past few years, Peter Guber and Chong Peters ran Columbia. They did not make any decisions that were beneficial to Columbia Pictures at all. Instead, they unscrupulously drained the company's finances. The two men not only took a lot of salary and bonuses, but also squandered the funds that should have been used for the company's development on personal enjoyment. In the past few years, the total cost of Columbia's office decorations, private jets, and luxury yachts was as high as $170 million. If Peter Guber and Chong Peters worked hard to run Columbia, these expenses would not hurt the foundation of this veteran film company. However, the two of them had never put any effort into running Columbia. In the past 5 years, Columbia's only outstanding achievement was the film cooperation with Firefly. But these cooperation were not so simple. Sony had discovered that because of the cooperation between Firefly and Columbia, Columbia's overseas distribution network was half paralyzed. When Nobuyuki Ide remembered that his old rival Panasonic and Canada's Seagram Group were in the final negotiations for the Universal Pictures deal, Nobuyuki Ide could not help but want to retreat. But with Columbia's current situation, Sony had no way out. Columbia's current situation was not much better than MGM. Sony had spent $5 billion to acquire Columbia. If Sony sold Columbia now, even if they discounted the original purchase price, no one would be willing to take over. And even if someone was willing to take over, Sony would not dare to sell Columbia at a low price under the strong pressure from various parties. In this case, Sony could only grit their teeth and continue to operate Columbia. Although Sony was cheated by Firefly during the initial cooperation, but now, the rights to Men in Black, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Game of the Brave, and other films, and the distribution rights to Mission Impossible, Forrest Gump, and Night at the Museum were undoubtedly the most valuable resources in Columbia's hands. Although Nobuyuki Ide hated these Hollywood profiteers, he knew that if he wanted to maintain Columbia, he must make full use of these resources. Especially the sequels to Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. These two blockbusters had grossed more than $500 million at the global box office. With the reputation of the first film, the sequels would definitely bring in considerable profits for Columbia. Nobuyuki Ide attended the premiere of Mission Impossible today to test Eric's attitude towards the sequels. Without Firefly's cooperation, unless legal means were used, it would be difficult to start the sequels to Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But Columbia was now in trouble, and Nobuyuki Ide didn't want to cause another lawsuit. However, when he thought of Eric Williams's ambiguous attitude during the premiere, Nobuyuki Ide couldn't help but rub his temples. Since this matter couldn't be solved in a short period of time, Nobuyuki Ide thought about the next leader of Columbia. He looked up and asked his assistant sitting in the front seat, "Fujita, did you reply to Michael Ovitz's invitation?" "Yes, President. Mr. Ovitz has agreed to meet with you next Monday." With a wonderful plot and excellent marketing, Mission Impossible easily grossed $38.5 million at the box office in more than 2,900 theaters in the first weekend. Many media outlets gave very positive reviews to Kevin Costner's comeback after the failure of Law Enforcement. The LA Times even praised that Mission Impossible completely broke the shackles of the TV version. The plot is exciting, the scenes are dazzling, and Kevin Costner vividly portrays the image of a tenacious agent who comes back from the jaws of death. With the excellent reputation and box office in the first 3 days, evaluation agencies predicted that Mission Impossible would gross $160 million to $180 million in North America. Because another agent movie starring Kevin Costner, The Bodyguard, had a global box office of $410 million, and Mission Impossible was better in terms of quality and marketing. Therefore, box office evaluation agencies were more optimistic about the global box office of Mission Impossible. Most agencies predicted that the global box office of Mission Impossible would be no less than $500 million. The production and marketing costs of Mission Impossible were kept within $110 million, of which $40 million in marketing costs were shared by Flower Pictures and Columbia. Although Flower Pictures had invested $90 million in Mission Impossible, based on the global average box office forecast of $500 million, Flower Pictures would be able to recoup about $130 million just from the box office alone. If they recouped all of their costs, they would still bring in $40 million in profit. The income from the subsequent video and TV broadcast rights of Mission Impossible would be even more lucrative. In the new week, at Universal Studios in Burbank, Michael Eisner sat in his office early as usual. There was a hint of envy between his eyebrows as he read the weekend box office report that had just been sent by his assistant. After reading the report about Mission Impossible, Michael Eisner continued to look at the box office rankings, and his eyes fell on The Little Guy that was released at the same time by Universal. This was a project that Michael Ovitz personally handled after he became the president of Universal. The total box office for the first 3 days of this family comedy that used a man's pregnancy as a gimmick was only $68 million. Although it squeezed into the top 5 box office rankings, it was not even a fraction of the box office of Mission Impossible. Of course, Michael Eisner would not expect such a comedy with only a $30 million investment to be able to reach the box office of Mission Impossible. He just thought of Michael Ovitz's idea for this film. Michael Ovitz actually wanted to invite Arnold Schwarzenegger to be the male lead. With Arnold Schwarzenegger's net worth after True Lies, once Arnold Schwarzenegger was invited, the production and marketing budget of the film would also be raised at the same time. The production cost alone could reach $60 million. When the Little Guy project was confirmed, although Michael Eisner was still recovering from heart surgery and needed Michael Ovitz to help him manage Universal's affairs, he still firmly rejected Michael Ovitz's proposal. The two even had a private argument, and the decades of friendship also had a crack at that time. But now, looking at the box office data in his hands, Michael Eisner did not regret his decision. Instead, he was vaguely glad. The box office of The Little Guy was only $68 million in the first weekend, and the total box office forecast for this film was only $30 million. However, although this number was still less than the box office of Mission Impossible in the first weekend, The Little Guy would definitely still bring in a good amount of revenue for Universal through overseas distribution, video, and other peripheral channels. But if they had followed Michael Ovitz's suggestion, this project would have definitely caused Universal a huge loss. With this in mind, Michael Eisner could not help but count the series of ideas that Michael Ovitz proposed since he joined the company. He could not help but shake his head. Now, the negotiations between Panasonic and Seagram Group had entered the final stage. Michael Eisner once again made up his mind. No matter what, he had to kick Michael Ovitz out of Universal during this negotiation. Although the Golden Parachute Agreement signed with Michael Ovitz under his leadership made Michael Eisner feel like he was trapped in a cocoon of his own making, but when he thought about Sony's recent secret contact with Michael Ovitz and Panasonic's eagerness to get rid of Universal, Michael Eisner became more confident in kicking Michael Ovitz out of Universal. The assistant's knock on the door woke up Michael Eisner from his deep thoughts. "Mr. Eisner, Mr. Bronfman from Seagram is here. Chapter 674. With regards to Worldwide, both Panasonic and Seagram were very eager to make a deal. In the past few months, the two sides had already reached a preliminary agreement. They only needed to sort out the last bit of debt information and personnel differences before they could complete the final deal. In the past few months, Michael Eisner had been lobbying Edgar Bronfman, the head of Seagram, to help him kick Michael Ovitz out of Worldwide. For this reason, he did not hesitate to exaggerate Michael Ovitz's various inappropriate behaviors during his time as the president of Worldwide. Michael Ovitz was already used to using CAA's account to satisfy his own extravagant personal expenses. CAA was a private partnership company and did not need to constantly pay attention to financial reports like a listed company. As the founder of CAA, Michael Ovitz also had a very unique position in the agency. Therefore, no one dared to question his extravagant behavior. However, after becoming the president of Worldwide, Michael Ovitz did not realize that he had been promoted from a private company to an executive of a large listed company. Instead, he continued to maintain the lifestyle he had at CAA. He almost took it for granted that the expenses of decorating his luxurious office or giving expensive gifts to Hollywood celebrities should be reimbursed by Worldwide. This also created the first contradiction between him and Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner did not agree with Michael Ovitz's somewhat arbitrary behavior. At the same time, Michael Ovitz's strong desire to control at CAA also conflicted with Michael Eisner's strong personality. This was also the source of the conflict between the two. In the end, the conflict between the two confirmed the old saying that two tigers could not live on the same mountain. As the head of Seagram, Edgar Bronfman was certainly aware of this. After listening to Michael Eisner criticize Michael Ovitz not long after his arrival, Edgar Bronfman decided to kick Michael Ovitz out of Worldwide in advance before the deal was completed. Of course, Michael Eisner's lobbying was the result of this. However, as the head of a large consortium, Edgar Bronfman thought more about the stability of Worldwide after Seagram acquired the company. He did not want to buy a film company with many conflicts between the senior management. Although he was an outsider in Hollywood, Edgar Bronfman also knew that no matter what industry, internal management stability was necessary for a company to develop and grow. After Eisner finished speaking, Edgar Bronfman said, "Michael, I just want to know one thing. If you want Ovitz to leave Worldwide, how much will you have to pay?" Michael Eisner's face turned red and he coughed awkwardly. If it was not for the golden parachute agreement that he personally instigated, it would have been very easy to kick Michael Ovitz out of the company. This matter was ultimately his mistake, but Michael Eisner would definitely not admit this. Moreover, he had no choice when he made this decision. It was not easy for him to fully control Worldwide, and he did not want Panasonic to interfere with the management changes at Worldwide because of the heart surgery. According to the agreement that was signed, if Ovitz was asked to leave without any major mistakes, Worldwide would have to compensate him with $50 million in cash and another $50 million worth of stock options. After Michael Eisner finished speaking, he looked at Bronfman's expression and immediately added, "However, if Ovitz leaves voluntarily, Worldwide would have to pay a much smaller price. I heard that Sony is currently in contact with Ovitz and wants him to be the CEO of Columbia. It is very likely that he will leave voluntarily. Of course, even if Ovitz is not willing to leave voluntarily, we can also use this opportunity to add Ovitz's resignation into the agreement and let the Japanese bear the cost of his resignation." After listening to Michael Eisner, Edgar Bronfman tapped on the armrest of his chair and pondered for a moment. He said, "How about this? You organize the information about Ovitz that you have told me recently. In the afternoon, I will submit the information to Panasonic's negotiation team as evidence that Ovitz is no longer suitable to be the CEO of Worldwide. We will officially include the terms of Ovitz's resignation in the negotiation." Michael Eisner's face flashed with joy. He nodded and said, "I will prepare it now." At the end of 1994, Hollywood was once again in turmoil. Columbia's internal management began to shake, and Universal Pictures was once again faced with a change of ownership. The already eye-catching Flower Pictures lived up to expectations, and stood out with the success of Mission Impossible. It was like another firefly that had begun to shine. Michael Ovitz put down the Hollywood Reporter in his hand and went through all the major events in Hollywood recently. He was disappointed to find that none of this had much to do with him. This made him involuntarily recall a few years ago when he was still the head of CAA. Not only did he have control over several major film companies, but he also single-handedly led Sony's acquisition of Columbia and Panasonic's acquisition of Global, two deals that involved billions of USD. But now, although he was very unwilling to admit it, Michael Ovitz found that after leaving CAA, it was as if he had suddenly been reduced from a Hollywood trader to a chess piece. After operating CAA for 20 years, Michael Ovitz had accumulated a net worth of hundreds of millions. But for someone like him who had been at the top of Hollywood for a long time, losing power was definitely 100 times more painful than losing money. Michael Ovitz knew very well that the moment he sold all his shares in CAA, it was impossible for him to return to the agent industry. After his friendship with Michael Eisner broke down, there was no point in staying at Universal. Michael Ovitz had to start thinking about his next step. Fortunately, the turmoil in Columbia gave him a chance to make a comeback. The car drove into the Columbia Film Studio in Culver City. As soon as Michael Ovitz got out of the car, Nobuyuki Ide had already come up to him with a few attendants. A few years ago, when Sony acquired Columbia, Michael Ovitz had already dealt with Nobuyuki Ide. Although he could feel that Nobuyuki Ide was filled with unconcealable fatigue and anxiety, Michael Ovitz still gave him a warm hug. There were obviously a lot of Asian faces coming in and out of the Columbia Film Studios administrative building. Nobuyuki Ide even brought Michael Ovitz into Peter Guber's former luxurious office, but Peter Guber and Chong Peters were not there. They sat down in the office, and after a simple greeting, Nobuyuki Ide said bluntly, "Mr. Ovitz, you must already know that Columbia is in a very bad situation now. Sony desperately needs a manager who can reverse the current decline. In Hollywood, any film company will go through ups and downs. Columbia has decades of accumulation, and it also has the support of a large corporation like Sony. It is only a matter of time before it recovers," Michael Ovitz said confidently. "Of course, the premise of all this is that this film company needs a qualified manager." Nobuyuki Ide nodded in agreement and said, "Then, Mr. Ovitz, since you accepted my invitation today, you must be very interested in the position of Columbia's CEO. Can you talk about how you plan to manage this company first?" Michael Ovitz thought for a moment and said, "With all due respect, Mr. Ide, as a film company, there is only one way to survive, and that is to produce outstanding blockbuster films. When I was at CAA, I successfully promoted dozens of film projects to Hollywood studios every year. I believe that, in the whole of Hollywood, there are not many people who have more experience in film project management than me." Although the tripartite situation in Hollywood had greatly weakened CAA's dominance, Michael Ovitz's achievements in CAA were still obvious to all. The reason why Nobuyuki Ide chose Michael Ovitz was mainly because of his achievements in CAA. After listening to Michael Ovitz, Nobuyuki Ide nodded slightly and said, "Mr. Ovitz, since that is the case, Sony welcomes you to take over Columbia. What are your requirements in terms of annual salary?" "My requirements for annual salary are not high, as long as it is." After a pause, Michael Ovitz realized that Nobuyuki Ide did not want to hear Peter Guber's name, so he changed his words. "As long as it is the same as the previous CEO, it is fine. But I need to get the bonuses and dividends after the company's operating situation improves." Nobuyuki Ide was very satisfied with Michael Ovitz's conditions. He nodded and said, "Of course, as long as Columbia's operating situation improves, you will definitely get the compensation you deserve." "So, is there anything else?" Michael Ovitz said, "Yes, and most importantly, I don't want the company to be restricted by external factors in the process of operating, so I need to have absolute autonomy in Columbia." When he heard the words, autonomy, Nobuyuki Ide's body trembled. If he had not given the autonomy to those two bastards, Peter Guber and Chong Peters, Columbia would not have fallen to this state. Nobuyuki Ide had not had a good night's sleep for the past few days. After 5 years of squandering by Peter Guber and Chong Peters, Columbia's internal operating and financial situation had deteriorated to a shocking state. In order to reduce the losses and reduce the tax burden, Sony had to take measures to write down Columbia's assets. Based on the recent statistics, Columbia's assets would be written down by $1 billion. This also meant that Sony's annual financial report would have a huge loss of $1 billion. $1 billion. Sony had never suffered such a large loss since it was established half a century ago. Nobuyuki Ide did not dare to report this bad news back to Sony's headquarters. Chairman Morita Akio had just suffered a stroke a few years ago, and Nobuyuki Ide was worried that Morita Akio would be fine after hearing about this bad news. Now, when he heard the words autonomy from Michael Ovitz, Nobuyuki Ide felt a chill down his spine. He shook his head and said, "Mr. Ovitz, we can discuss other conditions, but please do not mention the autonomy again. You should have seen it for yourself. Sony had suffered a lot because of the management rights, and we will not let a single person manage Columbia." Michael Ovitz said, "Mr. Ide, you should know that I am different from Peter Guber. To be honest, I still do not understand why Sony hired those two incompetent people. I am confident that I can run Columbia well, but I need to have enough authority and trust. If Sony loses trust in the next manager of Columbia because of Peter Guber, I am sure that it will be hard for Columbia to recover. Hollywood is different from other industries. Hollywood studios need a paternalistic management style, and not the so-called modern management style. Look at the management structure of the 7 major studios, and you will know that I am not lying. Sony's attitude of letting Peter Guber go was not wrong. The biggest mistake was that you chose the wrong person." Nobuyuki Ide hesitated. He knew that Michael Ovitz's view was not wrong, but Sony had just been bitten by the viper. It was impossible for them to not be afraid of Nobuyuki Ide. "How about this? It's already dinner time, why don't?" Nobuyuki Ide was about to invite Michael Ovitz to dinner and continue their discussion when an assistant knocked on the door and walked towards the two people who were in the middle of their discussion. "President, I think you need to take a look at this," the assistant said, and looked at Michael Ovitz with a strange look. He passed a fax document to Nobuyuki Ide. Nobuyuki Ide opened the document curiously. He knew that the assistant would not barge into this meeting for no reason. There must be some important information in the document. After hurriedly reading a few pages, Nobuyuki Ide raised his head and asked the assistant who was still waiting beside him, "Where did this document come from, and this information? Is it accurate?" Today, after the negotiation between Panasonic and Seagram, this document began to circulate. Now. The assistant glanced at Michael Ovitz again, and there seemed to be a hint of schadenfreude in his eyes. "Now. The entire Hollywood is spreading it. I think it should be accurate." Nobuyuki Ide nodded slightly and waved his hand to ask the assistant to leave. He carefully read the document in his hand and frowned. Then he sighed softly and passed the document to Michael Ovitz, who already had an uneasy look on his face. "Mr. Ovitz, let's talk about the cooperation later. I think you should deal with this matter now." Michael Ovitz took the document. After flipping through a few pages, his face changed. He stood up abruptly and said to Nobuyuki Ide, "Mr. Ide, I'm sorry, I think I need to leave." Michael Ovitz hurriedly walked out of the office. His body was trembling slightly as he got into his car. After instructing the driver to start the car, he opened the document again. He was getting angrier and angrier. The document in his hand listed a lot of evidence that he was not suitable to be the CEO of Worldwide. But from Michael Ovitz's point of view, this document was trying to ruin his career in Hollywood. Just the fact that he spent $2 million to renovate his office made Michael Ovitz feel that his chances of cooperating with Sony were very slim. This was because in the end, the media's biggest criticism of Peter Guber and Chong Peters was that they spent too much money in Columbia. But Michael Ovitz felt that he had the ability to enjoy such treatment. Many leaders in Hollywood also enjoyed such treatment. But after experiencing Peter Guber's extravagance, Sony would surely be wary of such treatment. Then, he poached other record companies to expand Universal's record business, increased investment in the TV department, and invited A-list superstars to cooperate with Universal. These were all suggestions that he had made before. In the eyes of the people who concocted the information, All of them became evidence of his desire for grandiosity. Although their friendship was broken, Michael Ovitz still didn't expect that Michael Eisner would use such drastic measures to deal with him in order to squeeze him out of Worldwide. I had already decided to leave Worldwide. Why are you still doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? The more he thought about it, the angrier Michael Ovitz got. He picked up the mobile phone beside him and dialed Michael Eisner's number with trembling hands. When the call connected, Michael Ovitz gritted his teeth and shouted, "Fine. You have achieved your goal. Let me tell you, Michael. Don't even think about kicking me out of Worldwide. I will use a chain to tie myself to Worldwide's desk." Chapter 676. The report accusing Michael Ovitz was on the headlines of almost all the first-line media outlets the next day. As a big shot in the agency industry who had single-handedly created CAA and used the packaging mechanism to greatly increase the cost of the entire Hollywood production, the report accusing Michael Ovitz of being incompetent caused a controversy. It was difficult for the outside world to understand what had happened in Hollywood. They could only find out through the media. The internal conflict that Universal had been trying to cover up finally broke out. The rumor that Michael Eisner had repeatedly denied in news interviews that he had a conflict with Michael Ovitz was also confirmed. Although most people could only see the surface of this matter, on the night of the incident, Eric knew the whole story in detail. Michael Eisner desperately wanted to use this deal to kick Michael Ovitz out of Global while Seagram was in the process of acquiring Global, so that he could consolidate his power. In order to reduce the cost of firing Michael Ovitz, Michael Eisner had the idea of letting Panasonic bear the cost of Michael Ovitz's resignation. For this reason, he had specially prepared such a report. As Sony's arch-rival in the electronics industry, Panasonic did not have the awareness of being a sucker like Sony. Therefore, they leaked the information that Michael Eisner had collated and tried to include in the negotiation terms to the media. Although Panasonic did not make any public comments on the information, through this action, their attitude was very simple. This was Hollywood's internal conflict, and Panasonic would not be able to pay for it. Panasonic acted as if they were going to leave and did not care about anything else. However, they had stirred up a mess in Hollywood. Although the report accusing Michael Ovitz was full of Michael Eisner's personal bias, the content was not fabricated. Therefore, after verifying the authenticity of the report, Sony immediately dismissed the idea of letting Michael Ovitz take charge of Columbia. Just like what Michael Ovitz thought when he saw the report, just the fact that he had spent $2 million to renovate his office made Sony, who had just experienced the pain of Peter Guber's squandering, give up on inviting him. For Worldwide, the irreconcilable conflict between the two leaders had been forcefully torn apart, directly delaying the last step of negotiations between Panasonic and Seagram. Both sides knew very well that if this matter wasn't resolved, it would be very difficult to reach the final deal. After being slandered by Michael Eisner, Michael Ovitz knew that it would be difficult for him to find another company. The hope of returning to the agent industry was even slimmer. Therefore, just like how he roared at Michael Eisner on the phone, Michael Ovitz started to go to work on time at Worldwide every day. It was as if he really wanted to tie himself to Worldwide's desk. However, he no longer had any direct communication with Michael Eisner. With the Golden Parachute Agreement protecting him, Michael Ovitz was like a hedgehog in Worldwide, making it difficult for people to bite him. Although he faintly regretted throwing out the report too hastily, Michael Eisner could not admit that he was in the wrong. Because in Western society, admitting one's mistake meant that one had to bear the responsibility. The helmer of a large corporation often only had one way to bear the responsibility, which was to admit his fault and resign. This kind of result was definitely not something Michael Eisner was willing to bear. Therefore, in the subsequent interview process, in order to gain the approval and support of the media, Michael Eisner completely abandoned the firm friendship with Michael Ovitz that he had once publicly declared, and openly discussed the accuracy of the report. After spending Thanksgiving in the hustle and bustle of the media, Eric hurriedly returned to New York to do the latest post-production work for the upcoming broadcast of Victoria's Secret annual show on December 6th. Even so, Eric's eyes were always fixed on the City of Angels on the West Coast. If it had been a few years ago, Eric would have only been able to stand by and watch the mess that was happening in Hollywood. However, now he was thinking about how to further intervene and modify the structure of Hollywood through this incident. The development of the Firefly Group had reached a peak. Eric's next plan was to take control of the entire Hollywood step by step. This idea, which seemed whimsical to outsiders, was not unrealistic for Eric. First of all, Eric already had enough economic strength. Even if he did not consider the assets controlled by Firefly Investments, just the Firefly Group in the media field alone, the initial payment of the 2 asset sales this year and the annual operating profit of the group, excluding the necessary tax expenses, could still bring about $2.5 billion of free cash flow to Firefly. The operating cash flow of all the companies in the entire Firefly Group system was almost 3 times the free cash flow. With tens of billions of USD in cash reserves, if Eric was willing, Firefly could even take over the 2 companies in the hands of the Japanese, Columbia and Universal. However, if Firefly really did this, it would definitely cause uneasiness and fear throughout Hollywood and trigger an antitrust investigation by relevant agencies. Therefore, everything could only be done slowly in a subtle way. In this regard, Eric undoubtedly had another big advantage, and that was time. Even if it took 10 years to control the entire process of Hollywood, Eric would only be 35 years old by then. He would be in the prime of his life. Many people even just started their own careers at this age. Compared to the sunshine all year round in Los Angeles, just after Thanksgiving, the entire East Coast ushered in the first heavy snow of winter. Early in the morning, a black Chrysler was parked outside a high-rise apartment near Central Park at the entrance of 6th Avenue. Kelly got out of the car with the documents in her hands, gave a few instructions to the driver and assistant in the car, and walked into the high-rise apartment with her neck shrunk as she stepped on the road that had not yet been cleared of snow. She came to the door of Eric's apartment on the top floor and reached out to press the doorbell. After hesitating for a moment, the female assistant took out the key, opened the door, and walked in. The cold light after the snow stopped in the morning passed through the spacious living room covered by the glass curtain wall. At this time, the living room was filled with a lot of messy documents. The laptop screen on the coffee table in the middle of the living room was still on. This messy scene was out of place in this luxurious penthouse that overlooked the entire Central Park. Kelly even felt that she had suddenly arrived at the home of a Frankenstein monster. Taking off her thick windbreaker and boots, Kelly changed into slippers at the entrance and walked into the living room. At first glance, she saw Eric lying on the sofa in the living room with a blanket covering him, snoring loudly. This situation made Kelly feel both amused and puzzled. Sometimes, this little man's requirements for quality of life were as strict as those of a rich family's son, and he even had obvious misophobia. But sometimes, he was as casual as a homeless person, as if he was very satisfied with being able to eat and sleep well. Walking softly to Eric's side, Kelly gently put the documents in her hand on the coffee table, leaned over the sofa, and carefully stroked the messy hair in front of Eric's forehead with a gentle smile. She wanted to lean over and kiss him, but she was afraid of waking Eric up, so she did not move. Instead, she got up and walked to the kitchen. She quietly cut the bread and put it in the spit. Then, she heated up the milk. The female assistant was about to make an omelet when she felt a pair of big hands hugging her from behind. Kelly turned her head and allowed Eric to kiss her cheek. She smiled and said, "You're awake. Go and wash up. Breakfast will be ready soon." Eric was infatuated with the female assistant's neck and sniffed the mesmerizing fragrance for a while before letting go of Kelly, who was already weak all over, and walking to the bathroom. After a while, Kelly put the breakfast she had made in front of Eric and sat down on the other side. She then asked, "Why did you sleep on the sofa last night? What if you caught a cold?" Eric picked up the cutlery and answered, "I was thinking about some things, and unknowingly fell asleep on the sofa." Kelly curiously asked, "Was it something very important?" Eric nodded, but asked, "Is there any news from Hollywood today?" Kelly nodded and said, "Yes. Yesterday, Michael Eisner appeared on Late Show with Larry King. This time, he even accused Michael Ovitz of being mentally ill. I really don't know what he is thinking. If Michael Ovitz is really as incompetent as he claims, how can CAA become what it is now?" Eric nodded and did not make any comments. Kelly continued. There is also news from Columbia. Their financial audit had been completed. You will never guess that Columbia will face a $1 billion write-off. This will be Sony's biggest loss since its establishment half a century ago. Although this news is not made public, everyone in Hollywood is discussing if Sony will sell Columbia. This time, Eric shook his head decisively and said, "No." Kelly was puzzled. Eric drank a few mouthfuls of milk and explained, "Last night, I had read through the information you had gathered about Nobuyuki Ichii. We all know that he will be Sony's CEO. Do you know what his management philosophy is?" Although Kelly was in charge of Nobuo Idei's information, she did not notice this. She asked, "What is it?" Nobuo Idei's management philosophy is to let Sony move towards digital. Simply put, he wants Sony to focus on electronic products, entertainment media, records, and even the internet. Kelly blinked a few times and asked, "But Sony's roots are electronic products like Walkman, VHS players, and video game consoles. If he does this, won't he?" Eric smiled and nodded. "You are right. If Nobuo Idei insists on doing this, it will cause Sony's downfall." Eric couldn't help but think of the original space-time. After the new era, because Nobuyuki Idei neglected Sony's fundamental business strategy, Sony fell behind other industry competitors time and time again in electronic products such as MP3 players, personal computers, mobile phones, and other electronic products. In the end, other than high-end video cameras, Sony only had the PlayStation game console, which was their only product. Even so, they still faced strong competition from Microsoft's Xbox products. Kelly was not as confident as Eric. She said, "I feel that Sony will not be so stupid. Even if Nobuo Idei wants to do this, will there be any objections from the management? The board of directors of Japanese companies and Western companies are very different. The board of directors of Japanese companies are basically the company's internal management, and the Japanese culture is to obey their superiors. No one will object to the decisions made by the higher-ups. If not, there will be people objecting when Morita Akio bought Columbia for $5 billion. But I feel that Sony is facing a $1 billion loss, and Morita Akio will surely leave his position as the chairman. This way, after Nobuo Idei takes over, no one will object to his management strategy. Since Nobuo Idei wants Sony to go digital, then he will not sell Columbia. This is a good opportunity for us. Since the Japanese are not willing to sell, as an outsider, they will need a partner. Firefly can also continue to get profits from Columbia. I had thought about this last night, and I will discuss it with Katzenberg and the rest in the next few days. If the Japanese stay, it will only benefit us. That's why we need to take the initiative to lure them." Kelly smiled and suddenly thought of something. She hesitated for a while and said, "Eric, the Japanese company's board of directors you mentioned earlier is very similar to Firefly's." Eric looked at Kelly's cautious expression and laughed. "I had also thought about this last night." Kelly was surprised. "What's the result?" Eric shrugged. "The result is that I am not even 25 years old. I don't need to think so far ahead." Kelly was stunned for a moment before she laughed out loud. That's right, Eric was not yet 25 years old, not 75 years old like Morita Akio. There was absolutely no problem with Firefly's current development, and Eric did not need to plan in this regard at all. In fact, I'm also thinking that although I can still maintain a clear state of mind now, 10 or 20 years later, I'm likely to be as stubborn as Morita Akio and buy Columbia at a high price. Then, I realized I am starting to have this tendency. That's why I reflect on myself. Kelly was surprised. "Huh? Do you still remember Qualcomm?" Eric asked. Kelly nodded. "You did not mention it recently, and I thought you had forgotten about it." Chapter 677. Recently, whenever he had free time, Eric would take the time to study the information of Qualcomm that Kelly had collected for him. As a technical illiterate who knew nothing about mobile communications, Eric also spent a lot of effort to understand the advantages of Qualcomm's CDMA Systems Code Division Multiple Access Technology compared to the Time Division Multiple Access Technology of the second-generation communication system such as GSM. At the same time, Eric also found that Qualcomm was currently at the lowest point in its development process. The mobile communications industry was rapidly shifting from the analog signal era to the digital signal era. The second-generation mobile communications technology was very mature and had entered the commercial stage. Although Qualcomm had proved the superiority of its CDMA technology over 2G through many experiments and tests, so far, there was not a single CDMA commercial operation network in the world. Recalling the information he had recently read, Eric said to Kelly, "I found that I took Qualcomm's problem for granted. At first, I thought that since CDMA technology was better than GSM technology, and Qualcomm was now in a difficult situation, I would invest a sum of money in it and spare no effort to support Qualcomm's development. It would definitely make this company a leader in the industry. But the fact is more complicated than I thought. Qualcomm's current situation involves the development direction of the entire mobile communications industry in the Federation. The establishment of any mobile communications network involves billions or even tens of billions of dollars of investment. Once a certain communication system is established, even if this communication system is behind other technologies, it is still impossible to change in a short time. Therefore, the process of developing a communication standard involving a multi-sided game of interests is not something that can be decided by just saying, "My technology is better." There are too many cases in the world where bad money drives out good money. So, if I rashly invest in Qualcomm, it is likely that I will lose everything in the end. Kelly listened quietly to Eric's words. Eric had solemnly instructed her to collect information about Qualcomm. The female assistant had also studied Qualcomm's information in detail in private and had a deep understanding of Qualcomm's situation. Not to mention that the major communication operators in the United States were in dispute over technical standards, Qualcomm also had a conflict of interest with the operators. In the beginning, Qualcomm was like an outsourcing businessman that developed customized wireless communication solutions for communication companies. In this process, many communication operators held shares of Qualcomm through capital injection. This kind of interest relationship was actually a potential advantage for Qualcomm in the communication system competition. However, if Eric forcefully squeezed into the ranks of major shareholders of Qualcomm with his strong financial resources and diluted the shares held by the operator, it would definitely weaken the competitive advantage of CDMA. It might even cause Qualcomm to lose to standards such as GSM in the final mobile communication technology standard and become a marginal technology. If it were in the past, Kelly would definitely hope that Eric would not rashly invest in Qualcomm. But at this time, listening to Eric's introspection, the female assistant's tender eyes were filled with admiration. A man standing at the top of the pyramid could still maintain such sobriety and rationality. Kelly felt that she was a little obsessed with this little man. At the same time, she dispelled the idea of letting Eric withdraw. She said, "Eric, San Diego is only more than 100 kilometers away from Los Angeles. I mean, why don't you take the time to talk to Owen Jacobs, the CEO of Qualcomm, after you're done with the things here? No matter how detailed the information we collect is, it certainly can't be compared with the information held by the founder of Qualcomm. Maybe you can get unexpected results after you get in touch." Eric looked at the female assistant and smiled. "Didn't you disapprove of my investment in Qualcomm? That was in the past. Now that you have a very clear understanding of this matter, there's nothing wrong with giving it a try. Moreover, I think that your point of view just now completely ignores your current personal influence. With the capital in your hands now, if you fully support Qualcomm, it will definitely be able to gain a greater advantage in the competition of mobile communication standards." Eric had originally given up the idea of intervening in Qualcomm. He only planned to slowly absorb a part of Qualcomm's shares through Firefly Investment and become a moderate shareholder. But when he heard Kelly's words, he could not help but be a little moved. However, after considering his work schedule, Eric's face showed a helpless expression again. Even if he could find time to meet Owen Jacobs, he could not spend too much energy on Qualcomm. He had too many things to pay attention to now. Originally, this project could have been handed over to Firefly Investment, but Chris's personal energy was also limited. As several major companies under Firefly Investment began to develop rapidly, Chris was also very busy. In recent months, in order to solve the personnel and production adjustment problems caused by Nokia's rapid expansion, Chris had been flying for several months in a row. He only hurried back to the United States before Thanksgiving. Hearing Eric's concerns, Kelly reached out and patted the back of Eric's hand. She said, "Eric, there's still me. What about us? You don't have to take everything on yourself. Many of us can help you." "Okay." Eric grabbed Kelly's small hand that was about to withdraw and squeezed it. He said smugly, "In this case, maybe I need to plan well and allocate some of my energy to Qualcomm." Although he had made up his mind, the earliest meeting with Qualcomm's CEO, Owen Jacobs, could only be arranged after the new year. In December, commercial films such as Mission Impossible and Runaway Bride continued to reap the box office. With the advent of the award season, Braveheart, which was originally handed over to Fox and operated by the Wayne Stan brothers, also began to be released on a small scale. Firefly also released Lion, the Professional, directed by Luc Besson, at the end of the year. At the same time, the turmoil in Hollywood continued. Sony finally announced a $2.1 billion write-down of Columbia Pictures assets. This news shocked the entire capital market. After the news was announced, Sony's founder and chairman, Morita Akio, submitted his resignation letter to the board of directors. Although in order to protect the reputation of the business tycoon who founded Sony, Sony publicly stated that Morita Akio's resignation had nothing to do with the Columbia incident, not many people believed it. At Universal, Michael Ovitz's resignation was a foregone conclusion. However, the issue of Michael Ovitz's sky-high severance pay eventually became a dispute between Panasonic, Seagram, and Michael Eisner. Panasonic believed that the Golden Parachute Agreement was Michael Eisner's personal mistake. Therefore, if Seagram insisted on Michael Ovitz's resignation, the compensation should be borne by Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner insisted that Michael Ovitz's Golden Parachute Agreement was approved by Panasonic's board of directors and had nothing to do with him. Seagram knew very well that Universal's future operations could not be separated from Michael Eisner. He could only put pressure on Panasonic and even vaguely threaten that if Panasonic did not compromise, Seagram would change his target to Columbia. While paying close attention to the situation in Hollywood, Eric completed the editing of the Victoria's Secret television broadcast version in early December and once again focused on the final stage of Victoria's Secret's marketing. In order to expand the influence of the Victoria's Secret brand as much as possible, after the editing of the television broadcast version was completed, Eric asked Firefly's distribution department to start producing videotapes of the television version. Before December 6, the first batch of 1 million videotapes had been produced. After the television broadcast was completed, they could immediately be distributed nationwide. December 6, Tuesday. Although it was long past the end of the working day, there were still many people gathered at ABC's headquarters on 66th Street. This was because today was not only the broadcast of the final episode of the first season of Survivor, which was likely to create a ratings miracle, but it was also the broadcast day of the long-promoted Victoria's Secret annual show. ABC had just experienced a fruitful fall season. The three ace shows, Friends, Survivor, and Emergency Room Stories, were aired one after another. Their viewership numbers were all in the red, and they firmly occupied the #1 position in the market share of the public television stations. Among them, the reality show Survivor had created a new viewership miracle. The average viewership for the first 12 episodes had reached more than 33 million. Therefore, every employee who was asked to work overtime at ABC's headquarters today was filled with excitement and joy. Not only was it because the final episode of the first season of Survivor would bring high viewership ratings, but it was also because after the viewership numbers were released, the company's senior executives would definitely hold a grand party to celebrate. In the large conference room at ABC's headquarters, there were more than a dozen people gathered. However, compared to the broadcast of Survivor, this time, the people gathered in this conference room were mainly people from the Victoria's Secret project team. In addition to Eric, Edward Razek, Emily, and others, there were also 5 Victoria's Secret spokespersons who were invited. Because they knew that the final episode of Survivor was destined to be a huge success, ABC did not make it as big of a fanfare as when it first aired. Only Robert Iger appeared on the scene. Tom Murphy was already old, so he got off work early and went home. Katzenberg also did not fly over from Los Angeles. In addition to the Victoria's Secret TV show that started at 9 o'clock, the Yahoo portal would also open a popularity poll for the Victoria's Secret Angels. In the conference room, Cindy Crawford looked at Eric sitting at the conference table and skillfully tapping on the laptop keyboard to communicate with Tina Brown, who was also working overtime in Boston. She rolled her eyes and got up to go out for a while. Soon, she came back with a laptop. Behind her was a male employee with a fawning look on his face. He eagerly helped Cindy Crawford connect the network cable to the internet. When Linda Evangelista and the other women saw Cindy Crawford's actions, they surrounded her and gathered in front of the laptop, talking about it with great interest. Emily, who was sitting next to Eric, looked at the actions of the women and pulled Chris next to her with a sour tone. Beautiful women are really born with privileges. I also want a laptop. Why doesn't anyone lend me one? Chris, who was focused on reading a magazine, got up helplessly and said, Okay, I'll help you borrow one. Really, women? Emily's beautiful eyes widened slightly. What are you muttering about? Chris didn't answer. He walked out of the conference room in a hurry, causing a series of laughter. Emily was also a little embarrassed. She could only pretend to look at her watch, then picked up the document in front of her and poked Eric, who was whispering to Eric, Hey, Eric, the 1 million videotapes cost more than $5 million to produce. Do you think anyone would be willing to spend $30 to buy a short film that is only 40 minutes long? Eric was also a little uncertain, but he had already thought of a solution. He said, If no one wants to buy it, then give it away. Carry out various activities through the Yahoo portal, and even give it as a gift in the Victoria's Secret chain store. I didn't intend to use the videotape sales to make money. The 1 million videotapes are just like the internal mail order catalog of Victoria's Secret. The main purpose is still to promote. Of course, all the expenses for this year's Victoria's Secret show will be paid by me. From next year onwards, Ltd will have to pay for it themselves. Emily smiled and nodded. Because of the misgivings about the advertising effect of the show, Ltd had transferred the production rights of the Victoria's Secret show to Eric. Now, just based on the stock price, Ltd's market value had increased by more than $1 billion. Not to mention next year, even if Eric asked Ltd to compensate him for the production budget, the board of directors would definitely approve. Seeing her boyfriend come back with a laptop, Emily moved to the side. She thought of the episode of Survivor that was broadcast before the Victoria's Secret show and asked curiously, Eric, how many viewers do you think the last episode of Survivor will reach? As soon as she said this, everyone in the office, who had been doing their own things, quieted down at the same time and looked at Eric. Eric shrugged and pointed to the electronic clock on the wall of the conference room. He said, Everyone will know in half an hour. I believe everyone will be shocked. There was a sigh of regret around. Robert Iger, who was sitting next to Eric, asked a few more questions with a smile, hoping that Eric could give a prediction. Eric just shook his head and said nothing. This made everyone look forward to the viewership numbers even more. After the last episode of Survivor was broadcast, the preliminary viewership numbers from Nielsen really surprised everyone. Survivor's viewership numbers had just reached 38 million last week, but the last episode had just started and the viewership numbers had already reached a high of 49 million. After that, it kept climbing. When the final results of the reality show competition were released, the viewership numbers had reached 56 million. Hearing this amazing viewership number, Emily looked at Robert Iger, who was excitedly standing in the corner of the conference room with a mobile phone in his hand. She asked Eric, 56 million, what will the viewership numbers of the Victoria's Secret show reach? Eric had already expected this, so he was not as surprised and excited as the others. He looked at the big screen color TV in the conference room and said, according to the experience of shows with high viewership such as the Super Bowl, the average viewership of the Victoria's Secret show should be half of that of the show. Of course, after such a long promotion, I think the viewership numbers will definitely be higher than usual. TSK, even if it's only half, it's still 28 million, Emily said excitedly. I'm looking forward to the stock market opening tomorrow. The market value of Ltd is only a little short of $4 billion. As she said that, the big screen color TV finished playing an advertisement. The screen flashed and the silver versus logo of Victoria's Secret appeared on the screen. After a line of subtitles that reminded the audience that they could participate in the Victoria's Secret show's popular angel vote through the Yahoo portal, in the night view of Manhattan, the sound of drums sounded from afar. Chapter 678. The Victoria's Secret fashion show had adopted the strategy of binding marketing with Yahoo since the beginning. During the live broadcast with more than 40 million viewers, Yahoo's name would be mentioned in every theme of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. Yahoo's logo would also appear frequently in the camera. There was even a plot of the Victoria's Secret angel soliciting votes on Yahoo's voting page in the highlights. Under such unsparing joint promotion, relying on the strong ratings and popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, the audience who wanted to have a deeper understanding of the beautiful underwear fashion show opened Yahoo's website as long as they had internet at home. In the editorial department of Yahoo's portal in Boston, the person in charge of Yahoo's website operations, Jeff Locke, and the editor-in-chief of Yahoo, Tina Brown, were looking at the real-time user visits on the website's back end. They were excited. After the live broadcast of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, the number of real-time users on Yahoo's portal increased by 50% in just half an hour. Halfway through the live broadcast, Tina Brown pulled the main person in charge of Yahoo's editorial department into the conference room and began to discuss how to further expand the influence of Yahoo's portal with the popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. However, less than 10 minutes into the meeting, Jeff Locke barged in and said urgently, "Tina, this is bad. The Yahoo Forums server is down." Although she had been focusing on media content, Tina Brown had been working hard for the past 6 months since she joined the industry. Hearing Jeff Locke's words, Tina Brown realized the seriousness of the matter and stood up immediately. The last time Yahoo experienced an outage was a few months ago when the company launched its YCR instant messaging software. Due to a lack of estimation of the growth rate of its users, YCR's server crashed. At that time, due to the debate about the world's largest data processing center in Breaking Bad Girls, YCR's server outage became the focus of ridicule from its competitors. Who would have thought that in less than half a year, Yahoo would experience a similar situation again? Tina Brown stood up and followed Jeff Locke out of the conference room. She asked, "Have you informed Ian and Steve?" Jeff Locke took out his phone and dialed a number. At the same time, he explained, "I'll call them now. However, the technical department said it's not a big problem. We just need to restart the server." However, Tina Brown knew that things were definitely not as simple as what Jeff Locke thought. She shook her head and said, "Even if there's no technical problem, we'll definitely be in the headlines tomorrow." Jeff Locke was taken aback and smiled bitterly. The last time YCR's server crashed, Yahoo had lost a lot of face. Tonight, the website had a problem again at a time when everyone was looking forward to it. What followed was definitely a wave of mockery. After the call was connected, Jeff Locke briefly explained the situation to the CEO, Ian Neer. He quickly hung up and dialed Steve Mitnick's number. Due to the rapid expansion of the company, Yahoo's editorial department and headquarters were separated into 2 different office buildings. Tina Brown and Jeff Locke had just left Yahoo's editorial department building and were about to walk to the headquarters building nearby. Tina Brown's assistant quickly caught up with them with a phone in her hand. "Madam Brown, it's Mr. Williams calling." More than 10 minutes later, Yahoo's Victoria's Secret discussion area had returned to normal after the server reboot. The cause of the incident had also been identified. Victoria's Secret discussion area was a subcommunity of Yahoo's fashion forum. The server where it was located could withstand a maximum of 1 million visitors. For the current internet environment, this user capacity was originally very ample. However, due to the underestimation of the number of users once again and the strong flow of traffic from the Yahoo portal's homepage, the number of visitors to the discussion area during the Victoria's Secret live broadcast skyrocketed. In the end, the number of visitors exceeded the server's capacity by more than twice. It formed a data flow that was like a flood breaking through a dam and instantly crashed the server. After the Victoria's Secret discussion area returned to normal, Yahoo had to remove the Victoria's Secret discussion area's direct link from the homepage before the server capacity was resolved. Fortunately, The server outage this time lasted for a short period of time. After everything was restored, although it was inevitable that there would be some complaints from users, it was soon taken over by normal discussion posts. At ABC's headquarters, the live broadcast of the Victoria's Secret show had entered its final stage. Eric hung up the phone and curiously opened the Victoria's Secret discussion area that had returned to normal. There were all kinds of topics on the page. It was as if he could feel the noise. Can anyone tell me the name of the Victoria's Secret angel who looks like Audrey Hepburn in the second scene? Calling for votes for my Cindy. The YCR fan tribe has been opened. Welcome to join. I love the second and third songs so much. Everyone, come in and play with the lyrics. I only remember a few lines. I really want to collect all the lyrics. Did no one notice the Leningrad Symphony? Eric Williams actually used this Soviet war song as the soundtrack. Does it mean something? Why are there so many stinky men here? My friends from Baltimore, if you want to discuss bra styles, come to my YCR tribe. Tribe number 9527149. Where is the Victoria's Secret store in Philadelphia? Please tell me. Sob sob, that Baroque music is so sad. I cried listening to it. But I still want to listen to it 100 times. What should I do? Everyone, pay attention to the TV. The Cinderella incident is coming. The Cinderella incident is coming. Diane Kruger's shoes are about to fall off. I want to lick them. Although only 20 posts could be displayed on one page, Eric could not help but smile when he saw some familiar topics on the page. Although the commercial prospects of online forums had always been poor, they were a great tool to gather the popularity of Internet users. They could even become an important stronghold to guide Internet public opinion. Just this alone was not something that could be compared to pure commercial potential. Eric was thinking about sorting out some of his memories about online forums and discussing it with Yahoo's management when the Victoria's Secret show on the TV screen finally came to an end. Soon, Nielsen also sent the final viewership figures. The average viewership of the Victoria's Secret show was 41.5 million. Because of the relentless hype of the Cinderella incident, the viewership figures reached the highest point of the show at 46 million when Diane Kruger's shoes fell off. The Super Bowl of the fashion industry. Early the next morning, the headline on the front page of the New York Post was such a blacked-out headline. The cover picture was also the opening scene of Diane Kruger wearing a bright red British-style military uniform. Since the first live television broadcast, the Super Bowl had a viewership of more than 100 million people every year. It firmly occupied the throne of the annual viewership figures in the Federation. Almost no program could shake the position of the Super Bowl. In the past, whenever a TV program tried to associate itself with the live broadcast of the Super Bowl, it was often disdained and ridiculed by the audience. But this time, the New York Post crowned the Victoria's Secret show as the Super Bowl of the fashion industry, and almost no one objected. Although the final viewership of Survivor reached 56 million people, which was 10 million more than the peak viewership of the Victoria's Secret show, the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show among the audience aged 18 to 49 years old was 26.8%, which was 6% higher than Survivor. Moreover, the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show was the core audience aged 18 to 34 years old. In the eyes of advertisers, the commercial value of the Victoria's Secret show was definitely far higher than that of Survivor. After the viewership figures were released, hundreds of domestic and foreign TV stations contacted Firefly on the same day in an attempt to buy the television broadcast rights of the Victoria's Secret show. HBO, a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, even offered a sky-high price of $5 million in an attempt to buy the cable television broadcast rights of the Victoria's Secret show in the United States. While paying attention to the viewership of the Victoria's Secret show, the media did not let Yahoo off the hook either. That night, Yahoo's forum once again experienced an outage, which inevitably became the focus of ridicule by several major IT companies. But these ridicule did not cause any damage to Yahoo at all. Instead, it once again increased Yahoo's public awareness. Many media outlets also realized the potential connection between Yahoo and Victoria's Secret in the process of branding that lasted for half a year. The commentator of US Weekly used a lot of space to analyze this exquisite joint marketing in detail. While Yahoo's traffic was steadily rising, analysts from several mainstream investment banks raised their evaluation of Yahoo's market value. After the Victoria's Secret show was held in Manhattan a month ago, the sales of Ltd's products and the company's stock price began to rise. After the television broadcast, the nationwide influence caused the sales of Victoria's Secret stores across the country to skyrocket. Ltd's stock price also skyrocketed by 22% in the following week, causing Ltd's market value to soar to $4.5 billion. However, while the Victoria's Secret show was a huge commercial success, it also attracted countless criticism. On the second day of the television broadcast, a large number of media people and conservative people, led by Thomas Peck, a commentator from the New York Times, criticized the Victoria's Secret show, which was full of sexual explorations, should not be broadcast on a national public television network like ABC. At the same time, the Federal Communications Commission (FCC) also received hundreds of complaint letters and phone calls, asking the FCC to ban ABC from broadcasting the Victoria's Secret show again and to punish ABC at the same time. The criticism and complaints from conservative people and the media about the Victoria's Secret show aroused a chorus of agreement, but there were also many opponents, especially in the online community dominated by young people. The conservatives' attempt to ban the Victoria's Secret show was almost universally reviled. Some women's rights groups also objected to the conservatives' accusations. This dispute lasted for more than a week and even set off several public cursing wars. Although there were no obvious violations of the Victoria's Secret show, under the pressure of all parties, the FCC had to meet with the heads of ABC and Ltd to discuss ways to solve this problem. In a mature capitalist society, capitalists with 100% profits could commit all the sins in the world. This was actually an alternative embodiment of the power represented by capital. Therefore, it was impossible to ban a television show with more than 40 million viewers. The noise continued until just before Christmas, when the FCC and the producers of the Victoria's Secret show finally reached a compromise agreement. This year's and subsequent Victoria's Secret shows, if broadcast on public television, must be placed after 10 p.m. and must be marked with the TV-14 logo to remind minors that it was not suitable for them to watch. At the same time as these things were happening, another unexpected thing also surprised and delighted many people. A week after the Victoria's Secret show, 1 million videotapes of the Victoria's Secret show officially went on sale. Emily and others were worried that no one would spend $30 to buy such a videotape that was only about 40 minutes long. Eric even planned in advance to treat the slow-selling videotapes as a gift. However, on the day of the release, 1 million videotapes were sold out. Firefly's distribution department had to urgently allocate resources to quickly produce another 1 million videotapes and put them on the market. They were also sold out. Perhaps the repeated shortages had formed a potential hunger marketing effect. Some media outlets also followed the trend and reported on it. In less than a month, the Victoria's Secret show's videotape sales were close to the 7 million mark. Firefly's distribution department finally reacted and took the time to do a survey. They found that 75% of the buyers bought the videotapes for the 6 songs in it. In other words, these people basically treated the Victoria's Secret show videotape as a music album. After a detailed evaluation, Firefly's distribution department estimated that the Victoria's Secret show's videotape sales would eventually exceed 20 million. What kind of concept was this? Each videotape of the Victoria's Secret show was priced at $29.90, which was actually $30. 20 million videotapes would bring in $600 million in sales. Because the Victoria's Secret show was only about 40 minutes long, the production cost of a videotape was only half of that of an ordinary movie. Excluding the distribution costs and the profits reserved by the channel operators, each videotape would bring about $15 in profit to the distributor, which was equivalent to half of the videotape sales, $300 million. The media, which had been entangled in Eric's abandonment of the movie and the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, were stunned to find that unknowingly, Eric had earned back this loss. The Victoria's Secret show music album, that came out of nowhere, also embarrassed music magazines such as Billboard and Rolling Stone. These well-known music magazines had their own weekly music charts, but in recent weeks, the weekly singles charts and other charts released by these magazines received a lot of boos. This was because none of the songs on these charts were from the Victoria's Secret show. In the hearts of music fans, any song from the Victoria's Secret show was strong enough to squeeze into the top of these charts. In this kind of one-sided booing, well-known musicians who originally wanted to release new singles at the end of the year postponed their plans. In fact, Billboard and other music media also had their own difficulties because Firefly Records did not take the usual route. When ordinary singers released a single, which one of them did not work very hard to chart through radio and TV stations. However, Firefly Records did not chart at all. So far, although the names of the 6 songs had been circulated, people still did not know which band or singer sang these songs. At Eric's request, Firefly Records did not disclose the specific information of these people. As a result, although the 6 songs of the Victoria's Secret show had been spread by music fans in private, and the videotapes of the Victoria's Secret show had been sold out one after another, except for a few public broadcasts by ABC TV and some cable TV stations that had bought the right to broadcast them, there was no trace of these 6 songs on TV or radio. If you don't chart, don't do PR, don't do publicity, and have no intention of showing your presence at all, how can I rank you? Just based on the sales of the Victoria's Secret show videotapes? After the Victoria's Secret show, Eric hid in Southampton to accompany his women and children. At this time, a pre-Christmas party was being held in the manor. In the living room, Emily hugged little Kevin intimately, but excitedly told Eric and the others about recent events. Jane Wenner of Rolling Stone can't reach you, so he can only call me. You don't know, but 2 days ago, he sounded a little pitiful on the phone. He said that if we don't chart those songs, their music magazines will lose their credibility. Eric, why don't you let Firefly Records release those singers in advance? Now is a good time. Anyway, Victoria's Secret has already gotten what it wants, so it's not a big deal if those singers steal some of the limelight. Eric leaned casually on the sofa, closed the magazine in his hand, and shook his head at Emily. In addition to the consideration of Victoria's Secret, this situation is actually good for those newcomers. If we start promoting now, the media will easily divert the focus of attention from these newcomers to other places. After Easter next year, let them gradually release their singles. By then, Victoria's Secret will have cooled down, and the media will focus more on these newcomers. Emily said, I think you must be worried about affecting the sales of the Victoria's Secret videotapes. But this result is really surprising. 20 million boxes of sales may eventually bring in $300 million of profit. $300 million, TSK. Although LTD's annual sales have increased a lot, the annual profit this year is only about $400 million. Eric smiled and said, Wipe your mouth. You're almost drooling. It's useless to be envious. You were the one who willingly sold the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show to me, so the money is mine. While Chris, Virginia, and the others laughed, Emily curled her lips and said, This wasn't my decision in the first place. The ones who should be regretting it the most are the people on the board of directors. During the last regular meeting, those fellows wanted me to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show. Although Emily's tone was very casual, after saying this, she looked at Eric with some hope in her eyes. Chapter 679. The LTD Group was acquired by Firefly Investment Company and the Brighton family through a hostile takeover. Although the two jointly held 62% of the shares and had absolute control, when Eric threw out the $20 million marketing plan to produce the Victoria's Secret show, it was immediately met with strong opposition from the other shareholders on the LTD board. In order to avoid another internal turmoil within the LTD Group, which had just completed a hostile takeover deal, Eric took the initiative to take over the matter. Even taking into account the possible reaction of the minority shareholders of Firefly, the production cost of the Victoria's Secret show was fully funded by Eric himself. From the establishment of the fashion show to the final television broadcast, the sensational effect it produced proved that the fashion show was a huge success. However, before the release of the Victoria's Secret show, no one thought that the fashion show itself had the potential to generate profits. Even though the high ratings after the Victoria's Secret show attracted a large number of TV stations who tried to buy the broadcasting rights, In order to expand the influence of the Victoria's Secret brand as much as possible, Eric's asking price for the broadcasting rights was very low. Some small European TV stations even bought the broadcasting rights for the Victoria's Secret show for only $100,000. In the end, the total revenue from this was only about $10 million, which was still not enough to recover the $20 million production cost. However, after the release of the Victoria's Secret show video, an unexpected situation occurred. The beautiful fashion lingerie, the collectible value of the videotapes of the show itself, the 6 songs that could hit the top of any music chart, and the thirsty marketing effect of repeatedly selling out of stock caused the popularity of the Victoria's Secret fashion show to far exceed everyone's expectations. Just in the United States alone, the sales of the Victoria's Secret fashion show could reach 20 million boxes, and the sales prospects in the vast overseas market were even more unpredictable. With the hot sales of the Victoria's Secret show video, just the sales of the video in the United States alone could bring Eric $300 million. Even if Eric's current net worth had reached tens of billions of US, this money was an unexpected windfall for him. While everyone was amazed by the sales of the Victoria's Secret show video, the most regretful ones were the shareholders of Ltd who had strongly opposed the production of the Victoria's Secret show. It was estimated that those people could not help but have the urge to bang their heads against the wall when they heard the sales figures of the Victoria's Secret show video. If it weren't for their strong opposition, the income from the Victoria's Secret fashion show would have belonged to Ltd. This income could almost double Ltd's annual profit. What was more serious was that Ltd would definitely not be able to get a share of the rich profits brought by the Victoria's Secret fashion show this year. However, because they had sold the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show to Firefly, Ltd would also not be able to share in the profits of any future Victoria's Secret fashion show. Therefore, Emily's attempt to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show was not surprising. Although both parties were very close, Emily was still a member of the Brighton family. Business was business. If they could take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret show, the Brighton family would also benefit in the future. In fact, from the beginning, Eric's plan was to produce a Victoria's Secret fashion show on his own and let Ltd see the advertising effects. Then, he would return the so-called copyright to Ltd and continue to operate it himself. He never thought that the Victoria's Secret fashion show would bring him such an unexpected windfall. But now, just like Emily's business, since the Victoria's Secret fashion show had achieved unexpected commercial success, Eric could no longer carry out his original plan. However, Eric also knew very well that the unexpected success of the Victoria's Secret fashion show could only happen once in a while because this year's success was achieved after Eric had spared no effort to mobilize the media resources of the entire Firefly Group and Yahoo's online media. He had also personally carried out the operation for half a year to achieve the final result. However, Eric could not continue to spend countless media resources to do this in the future. Even if he wanted to, the Victoria's Secret fashion show would lose its novelty and mystery, and the audience would not continue to buy it. At the same time, the format of the Victoria's Secret fashion show was very simple. It was not like the Super Bowl or the Oscar award ceremony, which could bring enough suspense to the audience every year. Therefore, this kind of success was completely impossible to replicate. Therefore, although the Victoria's Secret fashion show would definitely bring in some profits in the next few years due to the successful operation of the first edition, it could not be maintained for too long. Therefore, letting go of the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show now was almost equivalent to selling a stock at its highest point. After thinking for a moment, Eric said to Emily, "If I'm willing to return the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, what kind of price can Ltd offer?" "Huh?" Emily suddenly widened her eyes and looked at Eric in disbelief. She seemed to want to confirm if she had heard wrongly. Even Chris, Joanna, and the others looked at Eric in surprise. Although someone had proposed to take back the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show at the last board meeting of Ltd, Emily was also quite tempted. Otherwise, she would not have tested Eric just now. However, when she heard Eric say that he was willing to let go of the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, Emily still felt a sense of disbelief because, like many people, she did not have any expectations in her heart at all. However, she was only surprised for a moment. Emily recovered and asked to confirm, "Eric, is what you just said true?" Eric shrugged. "Of course, But if the price offered by Ltd is not sincere enough, I will definitely not agree. Well, we really haven't considered this situation. Emily smiled awkwardly and said honestly, I need to go back and discuss it with the other shareholders. However, Eric, you... Emily said and gestured randomly. You... How much do you want to be satisfied? Eric said, I'm not short of money now. If you pay in cash, I still have to pay income tax. It's not worth it, so the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show can be considered an equity investment. Hearing that Eric wanted to convert the copyright of the Victoria's Secret fashion show into Ltd's equity, Emily immediately showed a pitiful expression. Eric, Ltd sold the copyright to you at a symbolic price. Don't you feel embarrassed to ask for such a high price? Besides, you've already made so much money this time. Eric spread his hands and smiled. If it weren't for the unexpected income from the distribution of the video, I would have lost $20 million this time. Moreover, I also used up so much media resources from Firefly Group and Yahoo Portal. So, I can take this money with a clear conscience. Now that I've turned a yellow bean into a golden bean, of course you have to buy it back at the price of gold, haha. When Emily heard Eric say this, she stopped making meaningless gestures and talked about business seriously. Then, if Ltd takes back the copyright, will you personally participate in the production of the Victoria's Secret fashion show? Eric shook his head. This kind of participation is definitely impossible this year, but I'm also a major shareholder of Ltd. If I have any good ideas, I definitely won't be stingy. Moreover, this year's Victoria's Secret fashion show had a very good start, so even if I don't participate next year, you'll definitely be able to pull in a heavyweight creative team. Just like the background song of the show, you can work with some top musicians next year. With the current influence of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, those singers will definitely be very willing to use the show as a platform for the release of new songs. Although a part of the revenue from the video will be shared by these singers, Ltd's revenue will definitely be equally generous. Also, don't forget that the most fundamental function of the Victoria's Secret fashion show is to promote the Victoria's Secret brand. The direct revenue from the show itself will definitely gradually decline, but the Victoria's Secret brand will continue to strengthen over the years and maintain a very strong position in its own field. Emily kept nodding. After listening to Eric, she joked, Eric, I kind of want to get you to be the operations director of Ltd now. Everyone laughed. Eric also smiled and joked, then you definitely can't afford it. In the next few days, Ltd almost couldn't wait to come up with a proposal. In the end, the two sides reached a deal worth $225 million in equity. Eric was very satisfied with this offer. Originally, Firefly Investment and the Brighton family had an equal share of 62% of the shares. However, after this transaction, Firefly Investment's share had increased to 35%, becoming the largest shareholder of Ltd. The Brighton family's share had decreased slightly to 30%. Although many industry analysts were very keen to point out that the commercial success of the Victoria's Secret fashion show this year could not be replicated, the market's reaction was often very blind. Otherwise, there would not be a stock market bubble. Therefore, the conclusion of this deal once again stimulated Ltd's share price, causing Ltd's market value to break through the high level of $5 billion. However, this was something that happened a while later. After the Victoria's Secret fashion show was broadcast on TV, Eric's energy once again turned to Hollywood. With the arrival of Christmas, Firefly's Face/Off and Columbia's Game of the Brave were released one after another. Because Game of the Brave involved a lot of special effects, the special effects of the original version were obviously a bit rough. Of course, Eric did not want to repeat the same mistake, so he gave them a very generous budget. In the end, the production of the new version of Game of the Brave was much better than the original version, but at the same time, the budget rose steadily. In the end, it reached a high of $80 million, and $40 million was spent on marketing. In comparison, the final investment budget of Face/Off was only $60 million, and the marketing budget was much lower than that of Game of the Brave. However, after the two movies were released, there were some unexpected changes. Face/Off was released a week before Game of the Brave, and the box office for the first week was $36 million. At the same time, its exciting plot was unanimously praised by film critics, and the final box office could reach $120 million. Although the results were not as eye-catching as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the film could recoup its production costs in the North American market alone. Through the overseas market, it could realize a profit in the box office, and the follow-up peripheral publicity would basically be a net profit. Then, Game of the Brave was released. This special effects blockbuster that Columbia had high hopes for also had a box office of $36 million in the first week. That's right, it was almost the same as Face/Off, and Columbia's initial box office forecast was that the film should have a box office of $45 million in the first week. The difference between reality and expectations was obviously huge. Moreover, compared to the good reviews of Face/Off, Game of the Brave did not have a good reputation among film critics. Many film critics said that the film was too noisy, and that the director was too obsessed with the CG special effects. The CG special effects film market was not saturated yet, and many audiences were not affected by the bad reviews of Game of the Brave. In the second week, the box office for this special effects blockbuster only dropped by 26%, and the total box office of $62 million in 2 weeks was already very good. But according to the box office forecast, the final domestic box office of Game of the Brave was likely to stop at $140 million, which was $60 million lower than Columbia's estimated domestic box office of $200 million. After the $1 billion write-down incident, Sony already had a lot of resentment towards Hollywood. Although the box office of Game of the Brave was still able to squeeze into the top 10 box office of the year, and through various distribution channels, this film also had a very good profit potential, but the box office did not meet expectations, which was an indisputable fact. At the same time, because of the repeated setbacks in selecting the next leader of Columbia, Barry Diller, Amy Pascal, Michael Lynn, and other well-known Hollywood managers all rejected Columbia's recruitment. Sony felt that the whole of Hollywood was bullying them, and in the end, they could not help but throw a tantrum. The first thing that Sony did was to harden the negotiations with Firefly's Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They even publicly announced that if Firefly continued to deliberately delay the development of the sequels, Columbia would not hesitate to use legal means to protect their interests. Eric did not intend to make things difficult for Sony in the development of these sequels. He still hoped that Sony would continue to stay in Hollywood and contribute to the development of the film industry. However, Sony obviously did not think this way. As for Eric's struggle with the salary of the main producer of Men in Black, Sony had always believed that Firefly wanted to monopolize the copyright of Men in Black. Therefore, in a situation where the negotiations were fruitless, Sony instructed Columbia's temporary management to do something else. They requested to renegotiate the distribution contracts with Flower Pictures for Night at the Museum, Forrest Gump, and even the Mission Impossible series. Chapter 680. The negotiations between Firefly and Columbia for the development of sequels to Men in Black and other films were personally handled by Katzenberg. With Katzenberg's tough character, Eric was not worried that Firefly would suffer in the negotiations. As for Columbia's so-called threat of prosecution, it was even less worth mentioning in Firefly's view. Once Columbia filed a lawsuit, the lawsuit would take a year or two to settle. Firefly could afford to wait, but Columbia dared not to. However, since Columbia was interested in Flower Pictures, Eric had to deal with it personally. Therefore, just after the New Year in New York, Eric returned to Los Angeles. Although Flower Pictures had no equity relationship with Firefly on the surface, it was a very important step in Eric's Hollywood expansion plan. The whole of Hollywood was actually very clear about the inside story of Flower Pictures. After all, the 7 major film companies basically monopolized the distribution channels. Without the support of the 7 major film companies, no new Hollywood player dared to make a film with an investment of more than $50 million. Otherwise, they would definitely lose all their money in the distribution process. However, the seemingly inconspicuous Flower Pictures did so. Not only did it produce 2 super big films with an investment of about $80 million, but it also got a share clause from Columbia that made many second- and third-tier film companies envious. This was absolutely inseparable from the support of Firefly Group. The biggest reason why Flower Pictures dared to do so was that if the big investment film it produced could not get a reasonable distribution contract from the other 6 major film companies, Firefly could take over at any time. This was also the reason why Columbia chose to launch an attack on Flower Pictures after the new year. Flower Pictures currently had 2 films to be released, Wonderful Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump. Columbia originally set the schedule for the 2 films to be released in the summer of 1995, but now it was the beginning of 1995. The release plans of the 7 major film companies for the summer had basically been determined, especially Firefly. This summer's Jurassic Park 2, Day of Independence, and Toy Story 2 were all heavyweight films that required a lot of publicity resources. Once the negotiations between Columbia and Flower Pictures on the share contract collapsed, although Firefly could take over the 2 films from Flower Pictures, it would be impossible to spare enough resources to release the 2 films. The other major film companies might have the ability, but Flower Pictures would definitely not have an advantage in the share agreement. Then, in the end, the 2 films were likely to be delayed. The production cost of Wonderful Night at the Museum was $80 million, and the production cost of Forrest Gump was $50 million. If the film could not be released on time, the total investment of $130 million could not be realized in time, and the follow-up plan of Flower Pictures could not be carried out. This kind of domino effect would be a huge blow to Flower Pictures. In Los Angeles, Venice Beach, not far from Firefly Studios, in the office of Flower Pictures headquarters, Amy Pascal worriedly told Eric about the recent events. The reason given by Columbia is that the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations, and the style of Wonderful Night at the Museum is very similar to Game of the Brave. If they follow the original agreement, Columbia said that not only will they not get a profit, but they will also face a loss. Therefore, they want to change the established agreement and increase Columbia's North American distribution share from 15% to 20%. At the same time, they also want to participate in the distribution of videotapes and TV broadcast rights. Thinking about it carefully, the story style of Game of the Brave and Wonderful Night at the Museum were indeed very similar. Both films had a lot of animals, giant beasts, and exotic plants. Even the special effects of both films were done by the same team under Digital Domain. However, the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations, but it was not a problem of the film's quality. Although the reviews were not good, as a commercial giant that focused on CG special effects, the reviews had little impact on the box office. The main reason why the box office of Game of the Brave did not meet expectations was that the competition for the release schedule was too intense. Compared to the potential cooperation of the 7 major film studios during the summer to avoid internal friction, the competition for the Christmas slot in 1994 could only be described as fierce. On December 23, in addition to Game of the Brave, there were also Street Fighter, Little Women, and Love, which had a screen cap of more than $1,500, released at the same time. Relatively speaking, there were only 3 films released at the same time as Face/Off the previous week. A large number of new films released at the same time pushed the total box office of the 23rd to 29th to $188 million, which was the highest weekly box office of the end of 1994. However, in this week, there were 8 films that had box office of more than $10 million. Under such intense competition, Game of the Brave was still able to earn $36 million. The box office of the next week was only a slight 26% drop when the box office of the new films in the Christmas slot dropped. The box office performance could be said to be very good. If Game of the Brave had been released during the summer, when the competition was relatively relaxed, it definitely had the potential to hit $200 million. The reason why it did not meet the box office expectations was that it was born at the wrong time. Eric believed that Columbia definitely wouldn't be able to see this. Using the excuse that the box office of Game of Bravehearts didn't meet expectations to try to renegotiate the sharing terms with Flowers Pictures was a bit shameless. After thinking for a moment, Eric looked up and asked, "What about Forrest Gump? What's their excuse?" Columbia thinks that Forrest Gump is more suitable as an Olympic film. Its box office potential is limited, so Columbia has been somewhat uninterested in the release of this film from the beginning. After Amy Pascal finished speaking, she looked at Eric and said, "Actually, Eric, I think so too. Forrest Gump is a very good film, there is no doubt about that. However, its inspirational and nostalgic film style seems to be more suitable for the end-of-the-year slot. The main audience for the summer slot is still young people. Therefore, what we should do now is to ensure the release of Wonderful Night at the Museum. If Forrest Gump is delayed to the end of the year, it may be a good thing for it to hit the Oscars next year. This film's American culture is too strong. Without the halo of an Oscar, the income from overseas distribution will definitely be very limited." Eric listened to Amy Pascal's analysis patiently. As a strong woman who could be the head of a big Hollywood film company in his previous life, Amy Pascal's personal ability was definitely very good. Her analysis of the commercial position of Forrest Gump was also very accurate. However, just like the famous chocolate saying in Forrest Gump, no one knew what kind of box office potential it would show before it was released. Fortunately, Eric happened to know, so he just nodded slightly and did not agree with Amy Pascal's analysis. Looking at the little girl who was sitting quietly by the side, it was rare for her to not act coquettishly or act cute, and patiently listen to their conversation in a serious manner. Eric asked without hesitation, "Drew, what do you think we should do?" When Drew heard Eric's question, he thought for a while and said, "This depends on what you think. Columbia is doing this to force Firefly to develop the sequels of Men in Black and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Oh, now they must also include the sequel of Brave Game. If Firefly didn't get stuck on this issue, Columbia definitely wouldn't be entangled with Flower Pictures on the contract. After all, without these two films, Columbia will definitely not be able to find suitable films to fill the slot. They will also miss this year's summer slot. This is a lose-lose situation." Eric nodded and smiled. Actually, in the eyes of Hollywood, Sony is like a rich nouveau riche who wants to pretend to be cultured. This kind of character who is willing to spend money but does not have a big impact on the game rules in the circle will only benefit us. If the player behind Columbia is someone else, maybe we will not be able to do anything to them. So, I do not intend to force Sony out of Hollywood by restricting the copyright of those films too much. Amy Pascal showed a relaxed smile, and the little girl also spread out her hands. "Then what do we have to worry about? Just do as usual." Eric looked at their reactions and shook his head with a smile. He said, "You guys are too unambitious." From this incident, it can be seen that even your closest allies are sometimes unreliable. The reason why Columbia dared to do this is that even if Firefly wants to take over Flower Pictures, it will be difficult for them to do so in a short period of time. So, Flowers Pictures will have to rely on themselves in the end. Amy Pascal was a little surprised. "Eric, are you saying that we should release these two films ourselves?" "Of course not. You can only do this slowly. The most important thing is that Columbia should learn a lesson. The other major film companies in Hollywood should also understand this. If you do not have enough confidence, don't fall out with your partners." Drew shook his head. "Eric, we're all confused by what you're saying." Eric looked at his watch and turned to look at the TV in the office. "It should be about time. Do you have CNN here?" Amy Pascal nodded. She found the remote control and turned on the TV to find the CNN news channel. The scene happened to be cut from a piece of news about the auction of mobile telecommunications licenses. The host held a press release in his hand and said to the camera, "Latest news, at 10:15 p.m. Jeffrey Katzenberg, CEO of Firefly Group, and Howard Stringer, president of Sony's American branch, jointly held a press conference at the Columbia headquarters in Culver City. They announced that both parties will start the production of the sequels to Men in Black and Game of the Brave this year. Let's watch the live report from our correspondent in Los Angeles." The three of them stared at the TV screen. After a while, Drew said, "Eric, this is too sudden. If we had known, Amy and I would not have to worry about the release of Night at the Museum and Forrest Gump." The little girl's voice pulled Eric out of his thoughts. He did not immediately respond to Drew's words. Instead, He picked up his phone and dialed a number. After the call was connected, he said to the other end of the phone, "Kelly, I just saw the news about the mobile communications license auction on CNN. Find out what is going on. I want to see the details tomorrow." After a few simple words, Eric hung up the phone. He did not explain his actions just now. He continued the previous topic and said, "The reason why I asked Katzenberg to confirm this matter as soon as possible is to let some people understand that the next move of Flower Pictures has nothing to do with the copyright disputes of Men in Black and other films." Amy Pascal asked, "Eric, you mean, you don't want us to cooperate with Columbia?" Eric nodded and said, "Now that the dispute between Firefly and Columbia has been resolved, Flower Pictures will no longer be affected by the copyright dispute between Firefly and Columbia. If you look for a new distributor, there will be no risk of being taken advantage of. My plan is that the distribution of Night at the Museum will be transferred to MGM. I will personally communicate with Frank Marcheso about this. The distribution terms will be the same as Columbia's. MGM only has 007 in the summer, so there will be no pressure at all to release Night at the Museum. The overseas and peripheral operations of Forrest Gump will be handled by Firefly, and the domestic distribution will be handled by you. It will be a kind of training. Forrest Gump is more inclined to be an anti-Olympic indie film, so the distribution pressure will not be too great. The box office trend is more likely to be a long-term trend. You just need to get more than 1,500 canvases for the premiere." Amy Pascal listened to Eric's words and frowned slightly. She was a little hesitant. To put it bluntly, the distribution of a Hollywood movie was actually just a few steps. First of all, you needed to contact a cinema that was willing to show your movie. This was undoubtedly an innate advantage for the 7 major film companies. For the 7 major film companies, some promising movies often had signed distribution contracts with many cinemas as soon as the project was launched. They could even get a lot of advance money from the cinema companies. At the same time, this was also an important threshold that blocked most of the new players who wanted to enter Hollywood. Of the 7 major distributors, the cinema associations would take the initiative to seek cooperation. But if it was a brand new film company that wanted to distribute a film, they could forget about paying an advance fee or signing a distribution contract in advance. Even if they completed the production of the film, the cinema associations would not be very enthusiastic about screening the film. In the end, most independent films would not even have the chance to be released. This was because this involved the second key step of film distribution: marketing. The movie of the same quality, the same release scale, and the same schedule, the box office of the 7 major film distributors was often much higher than that of the second and third-tier film companies. The main difference was marketing. The 7 major film companies had a mature film marketing system. In recent years, the further integration of the media industry had made the overall media strength of the 7 major film companies far more than that of the second and third-tier film companies. Because the marketing of the movie was completed by the film distributor, therefore, under the situation where media resources were gradually gathered in the 7 giants, the cinema companies would even rather distribute mediocre quality movies produced by the 7 major film companies than to distribute excellent movies of small film companies. This was because the powerful marketing strength of the 7 major film companies could often make a mediocre quality movie far surpass the excellent movies of small film companies in the box office. However, although Flower Pictures was a Hollywood newcomer on the surface, the key problems that these newcomers might face were not a problem for Flower Pictures. Amy Pascal started from a small staff member of an independent production company more than 10 years ago and finally reached the position of vice president of Columbia. She was very clear about any key points of film distribution. She did not even need the help of Firefly. She could get enough theaters for Forrest Gump through her own connections. At this time, with the support of Firefly, the largest media group in the United States, the film's marketing problem was easily solved. Therefore, it was not difficult for Amy Pascal to handle the distribution of Forrest Gump in North America. But at this time, she just felt that it was not necessary at all, right? Wasn't it better to leave the distribution to Sony or MGM? As Eric said, MGM only had one 007 movie during the summer. It was not difficult to add another Night at the Museum to the distribution. Then, Adding another Forrest Gump, with a different style, was also not a problem. Even if MGM could not handle 2 movies, they still had a few other big films. Without worrying about the distribution, the time saved by Flower Pictures was enough to prepare another new movie. Eric, of course, knew what Amy Pascal was thinking at this time. Other than teaching Sony a lesson, he also wanted to keep as much profit from Forrest Gump for his own people. In the original space-time, the box office of Forrest Gump in North America was $330 million. If it was handed over to any company to distribute, at least 15% of the distribution fee would be divided. This money was almost $50 million. More than 90% of Hollywood's movies squeezed out the last trace of profit, but it was not necessarily $50 million of income for the producers. Looking at Amy's expression, Eric smiled and said, "Actually, this is my personal suggestion. You and Drew can think about it. If you really do not want to go through so much trouble, then forget it. Just transfer the distribution contract to MGM." After hearing what Eric said, Amy Pascal made up her mind and said, "Eric, I will listen to you. I believe you are thinking about Flower Pictures." After the two reached an agreement, the little girl giggled and came over to hold Eric's arm. Although she would never have any objections to Eric's decision, the little girl also knew that if she listened to Eric's every word and had no opinions of her own, it would definitely hurt Amy Pascal's feelings. Flowers Pictures couldn't do without this manager now. Chapter 681. After discussing the release of the 2 films, it was already close to noon. The 3 of them were planning to go out for lunch. As soon as they walked out of the meeting room, Eric met Tina Fey, who he had not seen for a long time. After Flower Pictures left Firefly, Tina Fey moved from being Drew's assistant to the management of Flower Pictures. She was responsible for the script review of Flower Pictures. After her job was settled, Eric rarely saw Tina Fey beside his little girl. Although both of them had a few intimate moments, Eric did not intend to keep Tina Fey by his side for a long time. However, since they met, Eric invited Tina Fey to have a meal together. There was a good restaurant near Flower Pictures' office building. The few of them sat down and ordered lunch. Eric smiled at Tina Fey, who was a little reserved. "Tina, are you still writing the script recently?" Tina Fey did not expect to see Eric suddenly today. They had not been in contact for a long time. Some of the feeling she had for Eric had faded a lot. She just felt that this man was becoming more and more dazzling and was getting further and further away from her. At this moment, when she heard Eric still talking to her in the casual and familiar tone, Tina Fey's reserve in her heart dissipated a little. She said, "I have some ideas, but I've been too busy recently. I don't have much time to write them down." Drew suddenly said, "Tina, didn't you tell me last time that you had an idea adapted from your high school life? Tell Eric and see what he thinks." When Eric heard this, he smiled and looked up. However, he thought of The Mean Girls, written by Tina Fey. However, he also knew that Mean Girls was adapted by Tina Fey from a novel called The Queen Bee and the Lackey. At this moment, he was a little curious about what kind of high school script Tina Fey would come up with. Seeing that Eric, Drew, and Amy were all looking at her with great interest, Tina Fey smiled embarrassedly and said, "Actually, I was a very annoying girl when I was in high school. I was a little crazy and always dressed like a tomboy. However, I was actually very envious of girls who could dress themselves up beautifully." This idea is roughly a story of a girl's transformation. In Eric's opinion, Tina Fey's script idea had a lot of similarities with Mean Girls. It was a story about a rustic high school girl who tried her best to turn herself from an ugly duckling into a swan in order to adapt to a new living environment and to make the boys she liked notice her. It was still inseparable from the elements of friendship, love, and trust between teenagers. In fact, such a coincidence was not difficult to understand. A scriptwriter's script style must be closely related to a person's personality, life experience, and other factors. Although the original Mean Girls script was changed from a novel, as the scriptwriter, Tina Fey must have added a lot of personal stuff into it. Since there were so many similarities between the two stories, Eric said. "Tina, take some time to write this story down. I'll take a look at it for you when the time comes. Maybe we can make it into a movie." Since there was a complete image of Mean Girls in his memory, Eric could obtain the original author's information from the subtitles. As long as he checked the relevant information to make sure there would not be any copyright infringement, Eric could ask the scriptwriter to transform Tina Fey's script into the original Mean Girls script. Tina Fey's eyes lit up when she heard Eric's words. With Eric's current status, since he asked her to write the script, the possibility of this script being made into a movie was close to 100%. Amy Pascal, who was sitting next to them, also had a slight change in expression. She said with a smile, "Eric, Tina is now a member of Flowers Pictures. You can't poach her in front of me and Drew, right?" Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "That's true. Speaking of which, Tina's script is quite suitable for you guys to operate. After Mission Impossible, Flowers Pictures will definitely have sufficient cash flow. It's time to increase the production scale." Amy Pascal's words just now were actually a joke. If Eric had his eyes on a script, any other company could compete with Firefly. However, Flowers Pictures would definitely not do that. After all, Eric had given Flowers Pictures enough high-quality copyrights. Therefore, Amy Pascal was a little surprised when she heard that Eric had taken the initiative to push Tina Fey's script to Flowers Pictures so quickly. Eric watched the change in Amy Pascal's expression and explained, "It's actually like this. Firefly is currently planning to gradually streamline the production business. We plan to reduce the annual production to about 15 films in the next few years. Therefore, we may not have too much energy to estimate the development of this kind of youth campus comedy." This time, Me and the other two were a little surprised. After the merger with Disney, the number of movies produced and released by Firefly in recent years had been maintained at the scale of 25 to 30. Now that it was suddenly reduced to 15, it was almost a reduction in production by half. If it were major film companies like MGM or Columbia that were not doing so well announcing a reduction in production, no one would be surprised. However, Firefly Group had been in the limelight in recent years. It was too surprising for them to suddenly announce a reduction in production. Amy Pascal was stunned for a few seconds. She still asked in disbelief, "Eric, are you sure you're not joking?" "Of course not," Eric nodded and said seriously. "This is the result of careful discussion by the company's management because we found that the effect of the strategy of large-scale film distribution every year was not so obvious. Instead, it was an excessive waste of the group's internal resources." Take last year as an example. As of the end of last year, Disney Studios, Disney Animation, Firefly Pictures, New Line Cinema, Touchstone Pictures, Pixar Animation, Black Ant Productions, and some films imported through external channels, released a total of 29 films. The cumulative box office for the year was $1.55 billion, accounting for 25.8% of the total box office of $6 billion in North America in 1994. As they were talking, the waiter served the dinner they ordered. Eric had to pause his narration. Amy Pascal was amazed by the series of numbers that Eric casually reported. Unknowingly, Firefly's box office market share had accounted for a quarter of the total box office in North America. If this continued, Firefly might really recreate the situation of MGM during the golden age of Hollywood. This made her even more confused as to why Firefly suddenly decided to reduce production in such a good situation. After the waiter left, Eric continued, "Although this market share is very high on the surface, Firefly has already started to lose money on many films. Firefly's total box office revenue in North America this year was $1.55 billion, but just the 5 films, Saving Private Ryan, True Lies, The Lion King, The Runaway Bride, and Face/Off, accounted for $750 million, which was almost half of the total box office. If the scope was expanded, in addition to these 5 films, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sequel, The King of Fighters, and other medium-sized productions had box office receipts ranging from $50 million to $90 million. The cumulative total of Firefly's top 10 films for the year reached $1 billion, accounting for 70% of the total box office share, and the profit brought by these 10 films accounted for more than 85% of the total box office profit. Next, the remaining 19 films only brought in $450 million of box office revenue for Firefly. The average box office revenue of each film is only $23 million, and the average production and distribution cost of these 19 films is $27 million. Although these 19 films can still bring some profit to Firefly through overseas distribution and videotape operations, the overall investment and output is very not cost-effective. After listening to Eric, Amy Pascal nodded as if she understood something. She said to Eric, "According to your analysis, Firefly's action of compressing the film production plan is definitely very wise. However, Eric, if Firefly does this, they may lose the first place in the box office market in the future. If it were other film companies, I don't think they would be willing to take the initiative to give up the first place in the market share." Eric smiled and said, "Fighting for the first place in the box office revenue is not very meaningful, and it is easy to be hated by others. Firefly pursues the first place in net profit." Firefly is now a comprehensive media group. Our future development focus in the film business is to produce more excellent films, and at the same time, we will put more resources and energy into the development of value-added businesses around films, so that every excellent film can maximize the benefits of the whole industry chain. In fact, Eric's decision was also the result of a detailed consideration of Disney's development strategy. In the original space-time, after the new century, the number of films produced by Disney each year was not high compared to other film studios. However, because of the use of the premium strategy, they could almost rush out a few box office dark horses every year. Therefore, although the number of films produced by Disney was only more than 10, with the excellent operation of the whole industry chain, Disney's profits had always been among the top of several major film studios. After a while, Amy Pascal asked again, "But, Eric, don't you think the risk is also very high? If the production scale is reduced to half, Firefly may miss some box office dark horses. Moreover, if some of the key projects fail, Firefly's annual financial data will definitely be very ugly." Eric said, "The box office dark horses with low production costs and high box office take up less than 1% of the Hollywood films that land in the cinema every year. This slim probability is not enough for Firefly to maintain a high-load distribution strategy. As for the possible failure of big projects, this risk still exists even if we don't reduce production. But now, the failure of one or two big productions won't have much impact on Firefly. Firefly is not a listed company, and we don't have to rack our brains to prepare beautiful financial reports for investors. We can completely run the company according to our own ideas." Amy Pascal nodded with some envy. However, Tina Fey suddenly said, "Hey, did you guys notice that the box office dark horses in recent years seem to be from Firefly?" When Tina Fey said this, the three women suddenly realized that this was actually the case. From the beginning of Home Alone, to Pretty Woman, to the peak of Jurassic Park, and last year's Lion King during the summer, ever since Eric's sudden rise, all the box office dark horses in Hollywood seem to have grown legs and gathered under Firefly. Looking at the curious and suspicious gazes of the few women, Eric spread his hands and smiled. "This is my personal talent. If you guys really want a reason, have you watched Men in Black?" Hee hee. Tina Fey could not help but laugh. She poked the little girl next to her who was also overjoyed. She even reached out and made a tentacle on her head and asked, "Drew, what's the color of Eric's blood? Is it sky blue?" The girl picked up the napkin and wiped her mouth with a naughty expression. Then, she lowered her voice mysteriously, "It's white. I've tasted it before, and it's a little salty. Ugh. Ha." Pfft. Cough cough. Tina Fey was stunned for half a second. Her face was instantly covered with a layer of red. She reached out and pinched the girl's ribs. Amy Pascal showed a puzzled expression, but she quickly covered her mouth and chuckled. Eric, on the other hand, could not help but spit out a mouthful of red wine. Fortunately, he immediately turned his head and walked around the table. However, because he held back that breath, he choked and coughed continuously. Looking at the little girl holding the napkin and approaching him with a weak expression, Eric was not at all confused by the little girl's expression. He unceremoniously knocked her head and said, "You're not allowed to make this kind of joke in the future. Remember, I'll never tell anyone that you're a Pandoran." Don't play dumb, you know that's not what I'm talking about. Aha! The waiter quickly came over and hurriedly cleared the table. However, the few of them were no longer in the mood to continue eating. They paid the bill and left the restaurant. Just like the Twilight series in the original Spacetime and Lionsgate's The Hunger Games series, for second- and third-tier film companies, a blockbuster film series could often make them rise. Although it was just a simple production company, i.e. Mission Impossible, with an estimated global box office of $500 million could continuously bring hundreds of millions of US dollars of cash flow to Flower Pictures. Flower Pictures' early launch of Mission Impossible, Night at the Museum, and Forrest Gump still needed to rely on cooperation with other film companies or external financing. However, after Mission Impossible, even if it took some time for cash to flow back, Flower Pictures did not have any pressure in terms of funding. In this case, expansion was almost imperative. Other than the idea of the youth school film that Tina Fey came up with at the last minute during lunch, Eric studied some of the scripts that Flower Pictures had recently collected with Drew, Amy, and the others that afternoon. The superheroes' copyrights that Flower Pictures had helped Eric to recover had been returned to Marvel Entertainment. The other copyrights for The Lord of the Rings, The Bourne Identity, and other copyrights had not reached the time to be developed yet. Therefore, if they wanted to develop new projects, they could only choose by themselves for the time being. However, good scripts were indeed hard to come by. The few of them surrounded the pile of scripts sent by the script manager and studied them for an entire afternoon. They did not find any that were outstanding enough, nor did they find any that were familiar in Eric's memory. After work, Eric did not return to Malibu because he had to go to Burbank early in the morning to attend the high-level meeting of Firefly. Instead, he planned to spend the night at the little girl's mansion in Beverly Hills. The twins drove the car onto the road, and the little girl, who was sitting in the back seat with Eric, laid on Eric's body softly. "I'm so tired, Eric. It's so troublesome to pick a script. You might as well write a few for us." Eric pinched the face of the girl who was resting on his lap and smiled. "Do you really think I'm from Pandora?" Drew turned his baby face and looked up at Eric. "You wrote so many scripts in the past." Eric explained, "It's different now. I don't have so much time to think about scripts." After being together for so long, the little girl could naturally tell that Eric was not being sincere. However, she had no intention of getting to the bottom of it. She believed that Eric must have had a reason to lie to her. Eric looked at the little girl in his arms with sparkling eyes and smiled. He did not say anything else. However, he was thinking about what Tina Fey said in the afternoon. The box office dark horses in the past few years have all come from Firefly. This casual remark made Eric wary because Tina Fey's words were not accurate. To be more precise, the box office dark horses in the past few years had all come from Eric himself, whether it was the ones he personally picked or the ones he personally wrote. The memory of his rebirth was Eric's greatest wealth and also his greatest secret. This was a society where the strong preyed on the weak. Eric would not feel guilty for taking out the scripts in his memory and claiming them as his own. However, he did not want this situation to continue and people would really think that he was an alien or something. Moreover, now that he had wealth and power, he did not have to do everything by himself. As long as the excellent films in his memory reappeared according to the historical trajectory, Firefly would have enough power to take these projects. Those copyright owners would definitely be more inclined to cooperate with a powerful company like Firefly. The car had unknowingly driven into the narrow mountain road of Beverly Hills. The slight bump pulled Eric back to reality from his thoughts. Looking at the little girl who had already closed her eyes in his arms, Eric smiled and reached out to touch the girl's eyelashes. Her bright eyes immediately opened. "You haven't had dinner yet, and you're already sleepy?" Drew rubbed her little head against Eric's body and said in a sweet voice, "I just want to sleep in your arms." "Oh, right, I just remembered. Regarding the sequel of Mission Impossible, have you contacted Kevin Costner?" "Yes, he wants $20 million and 20% of the North American box office." Eric did a simple calculation in his mind. If the sequel could achieve the results of the first film, Kevin Costner would probably take about $60 million from this project. This was really an exorbitant demand. In his memory, although Tom Cruise took more than $70 million for Mission Impossible, he had participated in the production and investment. And then, Eric asked again. The little girl tugged at the corner of Eric's shirt and said, "What else is there?" "We'll give him 20%, and the distributor will take 15%. We'll only be left with 20%. The local box office is the fastest way for a movie to get back its funds. We're not those big movie companies that can slowly recover their funds through long-term operations. How can we give this share to him? That's why we broke off the moment we met. He should be shooting future Waterworld in Hawaii now. Hee, I just heard that the shooting of that film didn't go well. The set they chose was too stormy. A set of more than $5 million was destroyed by a big wave, and then it had to be rebuilt. Now the budget has been exceeded by a lot. The inertia of history was really powerful." Eric's lips curled into a smile. Perhaps the film with the largest budget before Titanic would be born on schedule. Patting the little girl's excited face, Eric said, "Then let's put this matter aside for the time being. If future Waterworld fails, together with last year's Enforcer, Kevin Costner will be saddled with 2 films that will make the investors lose a lot of money. It can't be done more than 3 times. When the time comes, he will definitely take the initiative to contact you." The little girl, who was leaning on Eric, giggled and snorted a few times, as if she was hatching some bad ideas. The car soon entered the Beverly Rollsdale estate, and after a while, it stopped outside Drew's mansion. The little girl had just sat up when the twins sitting in the front passenger seat turned their heads and pointed outside the door of the mansion, saying, "Boss, look." Eric and the little girl looked over together. The sun had already set, and in the dim light, a girl in a white windbreaker and jeans stood quietly in the open space outside the mansion's gate with a backpack on her back. The girl's figure was very petite, and it was obvious that she had not grown up yet. Seeing the car stop, the girl hesitated for a moment before carefully walking over. Eric was a little puzzled. Why would Christina Aguilera appear at the gate of Drew's house? He opened the car door and looked at the little girl inquiringly, but the little girl just shook her head. When she saw Drew getting out of the car, all of Christina's hesitation disappeared. She ran over excitedly, and when she noticed Eric getting out of the car from the other side, her face was filled with joy. Although her footsteps paused when she saw Eric, Christina quickly walked over to the little girl and said excitedly, "Drew, I thought you wouldn't come back today." The little girl hugged Christina passionately. Although the little girl was not tall, Christina looked even more petite. After a while, the little girl let go of the girl and smiled. "It's been a long time. Why did you come to see me all of a sudden?" Christina was about to speak when she saw Eric walking over. She quickly turned around and greeted him obediently, "Mr. Williams, hello." Eric just smiled and nodded, looking at Drew. Christina also turned her attention to the little girl, and said with a little sadness in her voice, "Drew, I am here to say goodbye. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.